Hello, creatures of the night. Welcome to the channel where fear meets fun. Before we begin our macabre journey today, I want to ask you to leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'll love reading your response. Don't forget to hit the like button and get ready to sleep with plenty of fear. All because the headlights of our beat-up Subaru cut through the darkness as we wound our way along the narrow, twisting road. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the night. I sat in the passenger seat, map spread across my lap, squinting at the barely visible landmarks. "You sure this is the right way, Alex?" Jake asked from behind the wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped it tightly. I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Yeah, should be just up ahead. There's supposed to be a small clearing where we can park." In the back seat, Mia leaned forward, her breath warm on my neck as she peered at the map. "I still can't believe you talked us into this, Alex. A midnight hike in Shawnee National Forest? We must be crazy." I grinned, turning to face her. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure? This is going to be epic." Jake snorted. "Epic or stupid? Jury's still out on that one." As if on cue, the trees parted, revealing a small gravel area just off the road. Jake guided the car into the clearing, the headlights illuminating a weathered sign that read, "Shawnee National Forest, River to River Trail." "This is it," I announced, folding up the map. "End of the road, folks." We climbed out of the car, and I was immediately struck by the silence. Living in Chicago, you get used to a constant background hum of city life. But here, it was like someone had hit the mute button on the world. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs. It smelled of pine and damp earth with just a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place. "God, it's cold," Mia muttered, hugging herself. "Remind me again why we're not doing this in the daytime like normal people?" I laughed, moving to the trunk to start unloading our gear. "Because normal is boring. Besides, the forest comes alive at night. It's a whole different world." Jake joined me, hefting his backpack with a grunt. "Yeah, a world full of things that want to eat us. Bears, cougars, wendigos." "Wendigos?" Mia's eyes widened. "Those aren't real, right?" I tossed her backpack to her with a wink. "Guess we'll find out, won't we?" As we finished gearing up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night birds, not even the chirp of a cricket. "You guys hear that?" I asked, cocking my head. Jake frowned. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Nothing. It's too quiet." Mia rolled her eyes. "Great. 2 minutes in and Alex is already trying to freak us out." But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She felt it too. I shrugged it off, pulling out my flashlight. "All right, let's hit the trail. We've got about a 2-hour hike to the campsite I picked out." We set off, our flashlights carving paths through the darkness. The trail was narrow and overgrown in places, forcing us to walk single file. I took the lead with Mia in the middle and Jake bringing up the rear. As we walked, the silence gradually gave way to the normal sounds of a forest at night. An owl hooted in the distance. Small creatures rustled in the underbrush. It should have been reassuring, but somehow it only added to my unease. About an hour into our hike, a new scent caught my attention. It was faint at first, barely noticeable beneath the earthy smell of the forest. But as we pressed on, it grew stronger. I stopped abruptly, causing Mia to bump into me. "Hey, watch it!" she protested. I held up a hand, sniffing the air. "You smell that?" Jake came up beside us, his brow furrowed. "Yeah. Is that smoke?" Mia's eyes widened. "Smoke? Like forest fire smoke?" I shook my head. "No, more like campfire smoke. But that doesn't make sense. We're miles from any designated campsite. Maybe some other hikers decided to camp off trail," Jake suggested. "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. Something about this felt wrong. We stood there for a moment, undecided. Part of me wanted to turn back, to forget this whole adventure and go home. But a larger part, the part that had dragged us out here in the first place, was burning with curiosity. "We should check it out," I said finally. Mia grabbed my arm. "Are you insane? What if it's some axe murderer or something?" I patted her hand reassuringly. "In the middle of Shawnee Forest? Come on, it's probably just some campers. Maybe they need help." Jake nodded slowly. "Alex is right. We should at least take a look. Safety in numbers, right?" Mia didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue further. We left the trail, following the scent of smoke. It grew stronger as we pushed through the underbrush, branches catching at our clothes and hair. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and there in the center was a campfire. The flames had died down to embers, but they still glowed bright in the darkness, sending up thin wisps of smoke. We approached cautiously, our flashlights sweeping the area. There was no tent, no gear, no sign of whoever had made the fire. Just the fire itself, burning merrily away as if it had every right to be there. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" Only the crackling of the embers answered me. Jake crouched down next to the fire, holding his hand out. "It's still warm. Whoever was here can't have left too long ago." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. I played my flashlight around the clearing again, half expecting to see someone watching us from the shadows. But there was nothing. Mia's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "Guys, I don't like this. We should go." I was about to agree when something caught my eye. Just at the edge of the firelight, half hidden by leaves, was a small leather-bound book. Without thinking, I stepped forward and picked it up. It was old, the leather cracked and worn, and on the cover, barely visible in the faint light, was a symbol I'd never seen before. A circle, with strange angular lines inside it. As I touched it, a jolt seemed to go through me. For a split second, I could have sworn I heard whispers, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably there. "Alex?" Jake's voice snapped me back to reality. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just found something weird." I held up the book, but before I could show it to them, a twig snapped loudly in the forest behind us. We all whirled around, hearts pounding. "What was that?" Mia hissed. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness beyond our little circle of light. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow darker than the rest. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Probably just an animal," I said. But I didn't believe it. And from the looks on Jake and Mia's faces, neither did they. Another snap, closer this time, and then another. "We need to go," Jake said, his voice tight with fear. "Now." We didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing our packs, we plunged back into the forest, away from the fire and whatever was approaching it. As we ran, I clutched the book tightly to my chest, unable to shake the feeling that we'd just stumbled into something much bigger and much more dangerous than a simple night hike. The adventure I'd been craving had found us all right. But as the sounds of pursuit grew behind us, I realized it might be more than we'd bargained for. And somewhere in the back of my mind, those faint whispers continued, speaking of secrets and dangers yet to come. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. The forest around us was a blur of shadows and reaching branches, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we stumbled through the underbrush. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't take another step, Jake called out from behind me. "Stop!" he gasped. I think we lost them." We skidded to a halt, all of us bent double, trying to catch our breath. The night was silent again, save for our ragged panting and the pounding of blood in my ears. Mia straightened up first, her face pale in the harsh beam of her flashlight. What the hell was that back there?" I shook my head, still gulping in air. "I don't know. But whatever it was, I don't think it was human." Jake shot me a look. "Don't start with that supernatural crap, Alex. It was probably just some weirdo campers." "Campers don't move like that," I argued. "And they don't—" I trailed off, suddenly remembering the book I'd grabbed. It was still clutched tightly in my hand, the leather warm against my skin. Mia noticed it too. "What's that?" I held it up, the strange symbol on the cover seeming to shimmer in the flashlight beam. "I found it by the fire, just before whatever that was showed up." Jake reached for it, but I instinctively pulled it back. He frowned. "Let me see it, Alex." Reluctantly, I handed it over. As soon as it left my grasp, I felt a strange sense of loss, as if I'd given away something precious. Jake turned it over in his hands, examining it closely. "Looks old," he muttered. "Really old. And what's with this symbol?" He traced the angular lines inside the circle with his finger. As he did, I could have sworn I saw the shadows around us deepen, pressing in closer. "Maybe we should put it back," Mia suggested, her voice thin with fear. "What if those things are looking for it?" I snatched the book back from Jake, holding it protectively. "No, it might be important. It might explain what's going on." Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking around nervously. "What's going on is that we're lost in the middle of a forest in the middle of the night, being chased by God knows what. We need to find our way back to the car." I nodded, trying to orient myself. In our panic, we'd run blindly, and now I had no idea which direction we'd come from. The trees all looked the same in the darkness, looming and unfriendly. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's just pick a direction and start walking. We're bound to hit a trail eventually, right?" Neither of them looked convinced, but it was the best plan we had. We set off, moving more cautiously now, our flashlights sweeping back and forth across our path. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made us jump. The forest seemed alive around us, breathing, waiting. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Mia grabbed my arm. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Look." She pointed her flashlight at a nearby tree. Carved into the bark was a symbol, the same symbol that was on the cover of the book. "It's just a coincidence," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. We kept walking, but now we noticed the symbols everywhere. They were carved into trees, scratched onto rocks, even formed by oddly arranged branches on the ground. Always the same, a circle with those strange angular lines inside. "This is impossible," Mia muttered. "They can't all have just appeared. We would have noticed them before." I ran my fingers over one of the carvings, feeling the roughness of the bark. As I did, I heard it again, that faint whisper just on the edge of hearing. I jerked my hand back as if burned. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Jake and Mia looked at me blankly. "Hear what?" Jake asked. I was about to explain when a twig snapped loudly behind us. We all whirled around, hearts racing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared in the darkness. "Is someone there?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, came a reply. "Help! Us!" The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing inside my head more than in my ears. Mia clutched at my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Tell me you guys heard that," she whispered. Jake nodded slowly, his face pale. Yeah, I heard it." I took a step towards where I thought the voice had come from. "Hello? Where are you? Do you need help?" "Alex, don't," Mia hissed, trying to pull me back. But I shook her off, taking another step forward. The whispers grew louder, but I still couldn't make out most of the words. Just fragments. Trapped. Ritual. Coming. Suddenly the air around us seemed to thicken. The shadows deepened, swirling like smoke. And in those shadows I saw something. A shape, vaguely human but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. I stumbled backward, colliding with Jake. "Run!" I gasped. "Run!" We took off again, crashing through the underbrush. The thing, whatever it was, didn't seem to be chasing us, but we ran anyway, driven by blind panic. We burst out of the trees into a small clearing, and I skidded to a stop so suddenly that Jake and Mia crashed into me from behind. Because there, in the center of the clearing, was the campfire. The same campfire we'd found hours ago, still burning low and steady. "This is impossible," Jake muttered. "We've been walking for hours, we can't be back here." But we were. It was unmistakably the same clearing, down to the pattern of rocks around the fire pit. Except for one thing, the symbols. They were everywhere now, carved into every tree surrounding the clearing, etched into the very ground around the fire. Mia let out a choked sob. "What's happening to us?" I wished I had an answer for her. Instead, I found myself drawn towards the fire. It flickered invitingly, promising warmth and safety in this nightmare forest. As I approached, I noticed something in the embers. Reaching out, ignoring Jake's warning shout, I plucked it from the coals. It was a small, carved figurine made of some dark wood that didn't seem to burn. It was roughly humanoid, but with 2 long limbs and a featureless face. Just like the thing I'd seen in the shadows. The moment my fingers closed around it, the whispers exploded in my head. No longer faint, they were a cacophony of voices, all crying out at once. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, the figurine still gripped tightly in my hand. Through the haze of noise and pain, I was dimly aware of Jake and Mia at my side, calling my name. But their voices seemed to come from very far away. All I could focus on were the whispers, which were slowly resolving into a single chilling message. "The gate is opening, they are coming, and you have the key." I looked down at the book in one hand and the figurine in the other, a terrible realization dawning. We hadn't stumbled upon some innocent camping trip gone wrong. We'd walked right into the middle of something ancient and dangerous, something that had been waiting for us. As if in response to my thoughts, the fire suddenly roared up, the flames turning an unnatural, sickly green. In their light, I saw shapes moving at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin shapes with too many limbs gliding towards us with terrifying grace. Jake and Mia were screaming now, but I barely heard them. All I could do was stare as the things approached, the whispers in my head growing to a deafening roar. And somewhere deep in the forest I heard something answer, a sound too big, too alien for this world. The gate was opening. They were coming, and somehow I knew it was all my fault. The green flames died down as suddenly as they had flared up, plunging us back into near darkness. The shapes at the edge of the clearing seemed to melt away into the shadows, leaving us alone once more. But the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond our sight, remained. Jake was the first to break the stunned silence. What the hell just happened? I shook my head, still dazed from the assault of whispers. I don't know, but I think we're in way over our heads here. Mia was huddled on the ground, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to go home. Now." I wanted to agree with her, but something held me back. The book in my hand seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, and the figurine... I realized I was still clutching it tightly, its edges digging into my palm. "We can't leave," I heard myself saying. "Not yet." Jake rounded on me, his face a mixture of fear and anger. "Are you insane? Did you not see those things? We need to go before they come back." I held up the book and figurine. "Don't you see? This is bigger than us. Something's happening here, something important. We can't just walk away." "Watch me," Jake spat, grabbing his backpack. "I'm out of here. You coming, Mia?" Mia looked between us, torn. "Alex, maybe Jake's right. This is too dangerous." I felt a surge of frustration. "Fine. You guys go. I'm staying." Jake's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I need to figure this out. But you're right, it's dangerous. You two should get to safety." Mia stood up, brushing dirt from her jeans. "We can't just leave you here alone." Yes, you can, I insisted. Follow the trail we came in on. It should lead you back to the car. Jake shook his head. The trail? Alex, we've been running through the woods for hours. There is no trail. I blinked, confused. What are you talking about? The trail's right there. I pointed to a clear path leading out of the clearing, one I was certain hadn't been there before. Mia and Jake exchanged a worried look. Alex, Mia said slowly. There's nothing there. Just more trees. A chill ran down my spine. I walked over to where I saw the trail, my friends following cautiously behind. As I approached, the path seemed to waver, like a mirage in the desert. I reached out to touch a tree at its edge, and my hand passed right through it. Oh God, I whispered. What's happening to me? Jake put a hand on my shoulder. That's it. We're all leaving right now. Together. I nodded numbly, too shaken to argue. We gathered our things quickly, eager to put this clearing and its horrors behind us. But as we were about to leave, I noticed something half hidden under a nearby rock. Ignoring Jake's protests, I went to investigate. It was a journal, its leather cover weathered and cracked with age. I pulled it out, brushing off clumps of dirt and decaying leaves. The pages were yellow and brittle, covered in spidery handwriting and strange diagrams. Alex, come on, Mia called, her voice tight with fear. Just a second, I muttered, flipping through the journal. My eyes widened as I scanned the pages. Rituals, summoning circles, descriptions of creatures that couldn't possibly exist, and the same symbols we'd seen carved into the trees. I shoved the journal into my backpack, jogging to catch up with Jake and Mia. We set off into the forest, moving as quickly as we dared in the darkness. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind us, to see those impossibly tall figures gliding between the trees. But the forest remained quiet, almost unnaturally so. After what felt like hours of walking, we stumbled upon a small clearing. Exhaustion was starting to set in, and by unspoken agreement, we decided to stop and rest. We should be nearing the edge of the forest by now, Jake said, consulting his phone's GPS. But this thing hasn't had a signal since we entered the woods. Mia slumped against a tree trunk. Maybe we should just wait until morning. It'll be easier to find our way in the daylight. I nodded, too tired to argue. We set about making camp, gathering fallen branches for a fire. As Jake worked on getting the flames going, I pulled out the journal I'd found. What's that? Mia asked, peering over my shoulder. I found it back at the clearing, I explained. I think it might explain what's going on here. Jake looked up from the fire, his face shadowed with concern. Alex, maybe you shouldn't mess with that. After everything that's happened. But I was already opening it, drawn in by the promise of answers. The first few pages were filled with mundane observations about the forest, weather patterns, animal sightings, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I read on, the entries took a dark turn. Listen to this, I said, reading aloud. Day 47. The whispers are getting louder. I see the symbols everywhere now, even when I close my eyes. Something is coming. Something ancient and hungry. Mia shivered. That's creepy as hell. I flipped forward a few pages. Day 60. I performed the ritual as instructed. The gate opened just for a moment. I can't describe what I saw, but now they know I'm here. They're coming for me. Jake stood up abruptly. Okay, that's enough. We don't need to hear any more of this crazy talk. But I couldn't stop. The journal was filling in the blanks, explaining the terrifying things we'd witnessed. Day 65. The summoning is almost complete. When the stars align, the gate will open fully. They will come through and this world will be theirs. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through our camp, extinguishing the fire Jake had just managed to light. We were plunged into darkness, the trees around us creaking and groaning as if in pain. What's happening? Mia cried out. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart pounding. As the beam cut through the darkness, I gasped in horror. The trees around our camp were covered in symbols, glowing with a faint, sickly light. They pulsed in unison like a heartbeat. "Oh God," Jake whispered. "They weren't there before. I swear they weren't there before." I turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight around us. The symbols were everywhere, surrounding us completely. And beyond them, in the depths of the forest, I saw movement. Tall, thin shapes gliding between the trees, coming closer. "We need to go," I said, my voice hoarse with fear. "Now." We scrambled to gather our things, abandoning any pretense of breaking camp properly. As we were about to flee, I noticed something strange about the symbols. They seemed to be arranged in a pattern, forming a larger design. Despite the urgency of our situation, I found myself tracing the pattern with my eyes, trying to understand its meaning. As I did, the whispers returned, filling my head with their alien voices. "The key," they hissed. "You have the key." I looked down at the journal in my hands, realization dawning. This wasn't just a record of someone's descent into madness. It was instructions, a guide. "Guys," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, "I think I know what we need to do." Mia grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What we need to do is run." But I shook my head, a strange calm settling over me. "No. We're here for a reason. We have to see this through." Jake took a step towards me, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. "Alex, you're not making any sense. We need to leave, now." I looked at my friends, seeing the fear and confusion in their eyes. Part of me wanted to agree, to run and never look back. But a larger part, the part that had brought us to this forest in the first place, knew we couldn't leave. Not yet. "Trust me," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "I know what I'm doing." As if in response, the whispers grew louder and the symbols glowed brighter. The shapes in the forest drew closer, their impossible forms becoming clearer in the eerie light. We stood at the precipice of something vast and terrifying, something that threatened to swallow us whole. But as I clutched the journal tighter, I knew we had no choice but to plunge forward into the unknown. The discovery we'd made in this forest was just the beginning. The real journey, I realized, with a mixture of fear and excitement, was only just starting. The symbols pulsed around us, their sickly glow casting strange shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Jake and Mia stood frozen, their eyes darting between me and the encroaching darkness beyond our little circle of light. "Alex," Mia's voice quavered, "what do you mean you know what we need to do?" "This is insane." I clutched the journal tighter, feeling its leather cover warm beneath my fingers. "I can't explain it, but this journal, it's more than just a record. It's a guide." Jake took a step towards me, his face a mask of concern and fear. "A guide to what? Getting us all killed?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "To understanding what's happening here, to stopping it." A twig snapped in the darkness, making us all jump. The tall, thin shapes were getting closer, their movements jerky and unnatural. "We don't have time for this," Jake hissed. "We need to run. Now." Part of me knew he was right. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But something stronger held me in place. A certainty that we were meant to be here, that we had a role to play in whatever was unfolding around us. "If we run, they'll catch us," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Our only chance is to face this head on." Mia let out a choked sob. "Face what? We don't even know what these things are." I flipped open the journal, my flashlight illuminating the cramped handwriting. "According to this, they're called the Watchers. They guard the boundaries between worlds." "Worlds?" Jake's voice was tinged with disbelief. "Alex, listen to yourself. This is crazy talk." But I was already reading aloud from the journal. "The Watchers are drawn to those who seek knowledge of the beyond. They are gatekeepers, judges, executioners. To pass their test is to gain unimaginable power. To fail is to be lost forever." As if in response to my words, the shapes in the darkness stilled. The forest fell silent, the very air seeming to hold its breath. "What test?" Mia whispered. "What are we supposed to do?" I scanned the journal frantically, searching for answers. It says we need to complete a ritual. Something about opening our minds to the beyond. Jake grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. No rituals, no beyond. We are leaving, right now. He started to pull me away, but I resisted. "Jake, wait. We can't just..." My words were cut off by a piercing shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The symbols flared blindingly bright, and the shapes in the darkness surged forward. "Run!" Jake yelled, and this time I didn't argue. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. I could hear something moving behind us, a sound like dry leaves scraping against bark. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. Finally, we burst out of the trees into a small clearing. To our horror, we realized it was the same clearing where we'd found the abandoned campfire hours ago. "This is impossible," Mia gasped, bent double and panting. "We've been running for miles." Jake spun in a circle, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "They're gone. I think we lost them." But I wasn't so sure. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, was stronger than ever. I turned to my friends, seeing the fear and exhaustion etched on their faces. "Guys," I said slowly, "I don't think we can run from this. Whatever's happening, we're a part of it now." Jake rounded on me, his eyes blazing. "This is all your fault, Alex. Your stupid idea for a night hike, and now this insanity with the journal." His words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. "You're right. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Mia stepped between us, her voice trembling but determined. "Fighting isn't going to help. We need to figure out what to do next." I nodded, taking a deep breath to calm myself. "Okay, let's think this through. We can't seem to leave the forest. Every time we try to run, we end up back here. So what? We're trapped?" Jake's voice cracked on the last word. "Maybe not trapped," I said, an idea forming. "Maybe guided. Whatever's out there, it wants us here for a reason." Mia hugged herself, shivering despite the warm night air. "What reason?" I held up the journal. "To complete the ritual. To open our minds to the beyond, whatever that means." Jake shook his head vehemently. "No way. Absolutely not. We are not doing some creepy occult ritual in the middle of a haunted forest." But even as he spoke, I saw doubt flicker across his face. He knew as well as I did that we were running out of options. "What if," Mia said hesitantly, "what if Alex is right? What if it's the only way out?" Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Et tu, Mia? Have you both lost your minds?" I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling him tense under my touch. "Jake, I know this sounds crazy. Hell, it is crazy. But think about everything we've seen tonight. The symbols, the watchers, the way the forest itself seems to be against us. We're so far beyond normal that we need to start considering some abnormal solutions." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he let out a long, shaky breath. "Fine. But if we're going to do this, we do it carefully. No rushing in blindly." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Agreed. Let's set up camp here and study the journal. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we do anything." We set about making camp, gathering wood for a fire and unpacking our sleeping bags. As Jake worked on getting the fire started, I sat down with the journal, Mia peering over my shoulder. The more I read, the more my unease grew. The journal spoke of ancient beings, of gateways between realities, of powers beyond human comprehension. But it also hinted at a terrible price for this knowledge. "Listen to this," I said, reading aloud. "The ritual requires a sacrifice, not of blood but of self. To open the gate, one must be willing to lose everything they are." Mia's breath caught. "What does that mean?" I shook my head. I'm not sure. But whatever it is, it sounds dangerous. Jake looked up from the now crackling fire, his face grim. This whole thing is dangerous. Are we really considering going through with this? I was about to respond when a flicker of movement caught my eye. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden in shadow, stood a figure. It was tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an impossible angle. "Guys," I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. "Don't move." They followed my gaze, and I heard Mia's sharp intake of breath. The figure stood motionless, watching us with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Slowly, deliberately, it raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at me. A voice filled my head, not sound but pure thought, alien and ancient. "The key," it said. "You hold the key. Open the gate." And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, melting back into the shadows of the forest. We sat in stunned silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the clearing. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What just happened?" I looked down at the journal in my hands, then back at the spot where the figure had stood. A terrible certainty settled over me. "I think," I said slowly, "we just got our marching orders." Mia's eyes widened. "You don't mean—" I nodded. "We're doing the ritual. Tonight." As I said the words, the symbols carved into the trees around us flared to life, bathing the clearing in their eerie glow. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Whatever was coming, whatever test we were about to face, I knew our lives would never be the same after this night. The question was, would we survive to see the dawn? The eerie glow from the symbols pulsed gently, casting long shadows that seemed to dance and writhe in the flickering firelight. We huddled close together, the journal open between us, its pages illuminated by the strange light. "Are we really doing this?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "I don't think we have a choice. Whatever's out there, it's not going to let us leave until we do." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of worry. "Okay, so what exactly does this ritual involve?" I scanned the journal's pages, my heart racing as I took in the details. "According to this, we need to find a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a nexus point." "And how exactly are we supposed to find that?" Jake asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. As if in answer, a cool breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves. The symbols carved into the trees seemed to pulse brighter for a moment, and I felt a tugging sensation in my chest, like an invisible thread pulling me forward. I think I know," I said, standing up slowly. "We need to follow the symbols." Mia looked at me, her eyes wide. "Alex, are you sure about this?" I wasn't sure about anything anymore, but I nodded anyway. "It's our only lead." We gathered our things quickly, the weight of our decision hanging heavy in the air. As we stepped out of the clearing and into the dense forest, the symbols seemed to come alive, glowing brighter and forming a clear path through the trees. We walked in tense silence, the forest around us unnaturally quiet. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our own footsteps and ragged breathing. The path wound deeper into the woods, taking us through areas that seemed increasingly wild and untouched. After what felt like hours of walking, we emerged into a large circular clearing. Stone altars, weathered and covered in moss, stood in a perfect circle around the edges. In the center was a raised platform of smooth black stone, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as we looked at them. "Oh my God," Mia breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Jake stepped forward cautiously, running his hand over one of the altars. "These look ancient. How is this even possible? There's nothing like this supposed to be in Shawnee Forest." I approached the central platform, drawn by an inexplicable pull. As I got closer, I could make out the carvings more clearly. They depicted strange, alien landscapes and beings that defied description, all centered around a symbol that matched the one on the journal's cover. "This is it," I said, my voice sounding strange in the oppressive silence of the clearing. "This is where we need to perform the ritual." As if triggered by my words, the carvings on the platform began to glow with the same sickly light as the symbols on the trees. A low humming filled the air, vibrating in our bones. "Alex," Jake called, his voice tight with fear. "I really think we should reconsider this." But before I could respond, movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. The tall, thin figures we'd seen before, the Watchers, were emerging from the trees. They moved with an eerie grace, gliding rather than walking, their featureless faces turned towards us. Mia let out a choked sob. "They're everywhere. We're surrounded." I looked down at the journal in my hands, then back at the approaching figures. "We don't have a choice. We have to do this now." With shaking hands, I opened the journal to the page describing the ritual. It says we need to form a circle around the central platform. Each of us needs to offer something. A sacrifice. Jake's face paled. "What kind of sacrifice?" I swallowed hard. "It doesn't specify, just that it needs to be something important to us, something that defines who we are." We looked at each other, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just some campfire game or urban exploration gone wrong. We were about to do something that could change us forever. Slowly, hesitantly, we took our positions around the platform. The Watchers had stopped advancing, forming an outer circle around us. Their presence was oppressive, a weight pressing down on us from all sides. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to place our sacrifices on the platform and then open our minds to the beyond." Mia went first, her hands shaking as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, worn photograph. It's a picture of my dad. He died when I was little. It's all I have left of him." She placed the photo on the platform, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, the stone beneath it seemed to ripple, and the photo sank into its surface, disappearing completely. Jake went next, pulling off a battered wristwatch. "My grandfather gave me this before he died. Said it would always help me find my way home." His voice cracked on the last word, and he placed the watch on the platform with obvious reluctance. Like the photo, it sank into the stone and vanished. Finally, it was my turn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small notebook. This is where I write all my story ideas, my dreams for the future. I placed it on the platform, watching as it too was swallowed by the stone. As soon as the notebook disappeared, the humming in the air intensified. The glowing symbols on the platform began to swirl and shift, forming new patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Now what?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible over the humming. I consulted the journal one last time. We need to open our minds, to let go of everything we think we know and embrace the unknown. It sounded ridiculous, New Age nonsense that would have made me roll my eyes in any other situation. But here, surrounded by impossible things, it felt deadly serious. We closed our eyes and I tried to empty my mind, to open myself to whatever was out there. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, I felt it. A presence, vast and alien, pressing against the edges of my consciousness. I gasped, my eyes flying open. Mia and Jake were staring at me, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. And I realized I could see them, really see them, in a way I never had before. I could see the web of connections between us, between everything in the clearing. The trees, the stones, the Watchers, all of it connected in a vast, intricate pattern that stretched far beyond what my eyes could perceive. "Do you see it?" I whispered, not sure if I was speaking aloud or directly into their minds. They nodded, their eyes wide and unfocused. And then, as one, we turned to look at the center of the platform. The air above it was wrong. It rippled and twisted like heat waves on asphalt, but darker, deeper, and in that distortion I could see something. Shapes and colors that had no place in our world, glimpses of landscapes that defied physics and logic. "The gate," I heard myself say, though the words felt foreign in my mouth. "It's opening." As if in response, the distortion grew larger, the humming rising to a painful pitch. The watchers around us began to sway, their movements synchronized in some alien rhythm. And then, suddenly everything stopped. The humming cut off, the glowing symbols faded, and the distortion above the platform vanished as if it had never been there. We stood in stunned silence, the normal sounds of the forest gradually returning around us. The watchers were gone, melted back into the shadows as silently as they had appeared. Is it over?" Mia asked, her voice small and uncertain. I looked down at the platform, at the spot where our sacrifices had disappeared. "I don't know. I don't think so. I think this was just the beginning." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a sound echoed through the clearing. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It vibrated through us, setting our teeth on edge and making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And with that sound came a certainty, a knowledge that settled into my bones with terrifying finality. We had opened something, started something, that was far beyond our understanding. The gate might have closed, but its effects were just beginning to ripple out into our world. As we stood there in that ancient clearing in the heart of Shawnee Forest, I realized that our real journey, and our real test, was only just beginning. Whatever came next, we would face it together, forever changed by what we had experienced on this impossible night. The ritual was complete, but our story was far from over. The deep, resonant tone faded away, leaving us in an eerie silence. The forest around us seemed different now, charged with an energy that made the air feel thick and heavy. We stood motionless, each lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had just happened. Jake was the first to break the silence. "We need to get out of here now." His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I nodded, still feeling dazed. "Yeah, you're right. Let's go." We gathered our things quickly, casting nervous glances at the shadows between the trees. As we prepared to leave the clearing, I noticed Mia standing by the central platform, her hand hovering over its surface. "Mia?" I called out. "You okay?" She turned to look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something different about her eyes, a depth that hadn't been there before. "I'm fine," she said, her voice oddly calm. "Just thinking." Jake grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the platform. "Think while we walk. We need to move." We set off into the forest, following what we hoped was the path back to our original campsite. But everything looked different now. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, and more than once I could have sworn I saw figures flitting just at the edge of my vision. As we walked, I noticed Jake and Mia exchanging looks, having some sort of silent conversation. The realization hit me suddenly. They were planning something, and whatever it was, they didn't want me to know about it. I stopped abruptly, causing them to nearly run into me. "All right, what's going on?" Jake's face was a mask of innocence. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "You two are up to something. Spill it." Mia stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Alex, we're worried about you. The way you've been acting since we found that journal, it's not like you." I felt a surge of anger. "Not like me? We just performed some kind of ancient ritual in the middle of a haunted forest. How exactly am I supposed to be acting?" Jake put a hand on my shoulder, his voice low and soothing. "We get it, man. This whole situation is insane. But you seem, I don't know, almost excited about it. Like you want to go deeper into whatever this is." I shrugged off his hand, taking a step back. Of course I want to understand it, don't you? We've stumbled onto something huge here, something that could change everything we know about the world. Mia shook her head, her eyes sad. That's what we're afraid of. Alex, whatever this is, it's dangerous. We need to get out of here. Get help, not dive deeper into it. I looked between them, realization dawning. You want to leave. To pretend none of this ever happened. Jake nodded slowly. It's for the best, man. We're in way over our heads here. I felt a surge of betrayal, hot and bitter in my chest. So that's it? We just walk away? Forget everything we've seen? Everything we've learned? It's not about forgetting, Mia said softly. It's about staying safe. Alex, please, come with us. We can figure this out together, somewhere that's not here. I was about to respond when a movement in the trees caught my eye. One of the watchers stood there, its impossibly tall form barely visible in the shadows. It raised a long, thin arm, pointing deeper into the forest. Without thinking, I took a step towards it. Jake's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. Alex, no. I tried to shake him off, but his grip was like iron. Let go of me. We can't let you do this, Mia said, moving to block my path. We're your friends. We're trying to protect you. Anger surged through me, hot and irrational. Protect me? By holding me back? By trying to drag me away from the most important discovery of our lives? Jake's voice was pleading now. Listen to yourself, man. This isn't you talking. It's that thing. The journal, the ritual, whatever. It's messing with your head. Part of me knew he was right. The Alex from yesterday would have been running for his life, not arguing to stay in this nightmare forest. But that Alex seemed like a stranger now, small and ignorant. I had seen beyond the veil, glimpsed truths that most humans would never know. How could I turn my back on that? I'm sorry, I said, my voice cold, but I can't leave. Not now. Mia's eyes widened. Alex, please. But before she could finish, I acted. With a sudden burst of strength, I wrenched my arm free from Jake's grasp and shoved Mia aside. They both stumbled, caught off guard by my sudden violence. I turned and ran, plunging deeper into the forest. I could hear them shouting behind me, their voices fading as I put distance between us. The trees seemed to part before me, guiding my path. The watcher glided alongside me, always just out of reach. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Finally, I stumbled to a stop, bent double and gasping for breath. When I straightened up, I found myself in another clearing. This one was smaller than the ritual site, but just as ancient. A cave mouth yawned before me, its entrance covered in glowing symbols. As I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see Jake and Mia. Instead, I found myself face to face with myself. The other Alex looked exactly like me, down to the mud on my boots and the tear in my jacket. But his eyes were different, deeper, older somehow. He smiled, and it was my smile, but twisted into something alien and unsettling. Who? What are you? I gasped. The other Alex's smile widened. I'm you, of course. The you that embraced the knowledge, that didn't let fear hold him back. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This couldn't be real. No, that's impossible. You can't be me. He laughed, and the sound sent shivers down my spine. Impossible? After everything you've seen tonight, you still cling to that word? Open your mind, Alex. Remember what the ritual showed you. Reality is so much bigger, so much stranger than you ever imagined. I took a step back, my head spinning. What do you want from me? The other Alex gestured towards the cave. To show you the truth. To help you become what you're meant to be. I glanced at the cave entrance, feeling a pull towards it that was almost physical. And what's that? His smile was predatory now. A key, a gateway, the one who will open the door and let them in. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Them, the other Alex's form seemed to shimmer, revealing glimpses of something vast and alien beneath the human exterior. The ones who wait beyond, the true masters of reality. They've been patient, Alex. So patient. But now, finally, it's time for them to return. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. This was too much, too fast. I wanted to run, to find Jake and Mia and beg their forgiveness. But my feet wouldn't move. The other Alex extended a hand towards me. Don't fight it. You know this is right. You've always known, deep down, that you were meant for something greater. This is your destiny, Alex. Embrace it. I stared at the outstretched hand, feeling torn. Part of me was screaming to run, to reject this madness. But another part, a part that grew stronger with each passing moment, wanted to take that hand, to step into the cave and see what lay beyond. As I stood there, frozen in indecision, I heard voices calling my name. Jake and Mia had found me. They were coming to save me from myself. The other Alex's expression hardened. Choose now, Alex. Them or us, the truth or comfortable ignorance. Who do you want to be? I looked back at the forest where my friends' voices were getting closer. Then I turned to the cave, dark and beckoning. In that moment, standing on the threshold between two worlds, I made my choice. And nothing would ever be the same again. I took a step towards the cave, my heart pounding in my chest. The other Alex smiled, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Good choice, he said, his voice echoing strangely. You won't regret this. As I reached for his outstretched hand, a shout rang out behind me. Alex, stop! I turned to see Jake and Mia bursting into the clearing, their faces flushed and breathing heavy from running. They skidded to a halt, eyes widening as they took in the scene before them. What the hell? Jake muttered, looking between me and my doppelganger. Mia's voice was barely a whisper. There are two of you. The other Alex's smile turned cruel. You're too late. He's made his choice. I felt torn, caught between two worlds. Part of me wanted to run to my friends to escape this madness. But the pull of the unknown, the promise of hidden knowledge, was too strong to resist. I'm sorry, I said, my voice cracking. I have to do this. I have to know. Jake took a step forward, his hand outstretched. Alex, please. Whatever that thing is, it's not you. It's lying to you. The other Alex laughed, the sound sending chills down my spine. Lying. I'm the only one telling the truth. The world you know is the lie. A thin veneer over the real reality. And Alex here is going to help us tear that veneer away. Mia's eyes filled with tears. Alex, think about what you're doing. Think about your family, your future. You can't throw it all away for this. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My family, my dreams, everything I'd worked for. Was I really ready to give it all up? The other Alex sensed my hesitation. His form shimmed, revealing glimpses of something vast and inhuman beneath. Enough of this, he growled. The time has come. Before any of us could react, he grabbed my arm. His touch was like ice, sending waves of cold spreading through my body. The world around us began to blur and shift. No! Jake yelled, lunging forward, but he was too late. The clearing, the forest, my friends, everything dissolved into a swirling vortex of color and sound. When it cleared, I found myself in a vast, dark chamber. The walls were covered in the same glowing symbols we'd seen in the forest, pulsing with an otherworldly light. I was lying on a cold stone altar, my arms and legs bound with what looked like living shadows. The other Alex stood over me, but he no longer looked human. His form was constantly shifting, a mass of writhing tentacles and impossible geometries. Where am I? I gasped, struggling against my bonds. What are you doing? The thing that had been Alex laughed, the sound reverberating painfully in my skull. We're completing the ritual, of course. You're the key, Alex, the gateway, and it's time to turn that key. Fear gripped me as I realized the full magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't about knowledge or discovery. It was about something far more terrifying. You're going to open a portal. I whispered. To let them in. The creature nodded, its form rippling with what might have been pleasure. Very good. You always were quick on the uptake. Yes, the great old ones have waited eons for this moment. And you, Alex, you're going to be their herald. It raised a limb, and a wickedly curved knife materialized in what passed for its hand. The ritual requires blood, freely given. Are you ready to make the ultimate sacrifice, Alex? I struggled harder, panic giving me strength. No, I won't do it. You tricked me. The creature sighed, a sound like wind howling through a vast empty space. I had hoped you would embrace this willingly. But no matter. Your consent is preferred, not required. It lowered the knife toward my chest, its sharp point glinting in the eerie light. I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. Get away from him, you cosmic horror reject. My eyes flew open to see Jake charging towards the altar, wielding what looked like a branch torn from one of the forest trees. Mia was right behind him, clutching a rock in each hand. The creature whirled to face them, its form swelling with rage. Impossible! How did you get here? Jake's face was set in grim determination. We followed you through the portal. Did you really think we'd abandon our friend? He swung the branch, catching the creature across what might have been its face. It shrieked, a sound that made my ears bleed, and lashed out with a mass of tentacles. Mia ducked under the attack and rushed to my side. Hang on, Alex. We'll get you out of here. As she worked to free me from my shadowy bonds, I felt a surge of shame and gratitude. I'm so sorry, I choked out. You were right. I should have listened. She managed a tight smile. Less apologizing, more escaping. We can talk about this later. Across the chamber, Jake was putting up a valiant fight against the creature, but he was clearly outmatched. Every blow he landed seemed to pass through its shifting form without doing real damage. Guys, he called out, dodging another tentacle strike. Not to rush you, but I could use some help here. As Mia finally managed to free my right arm, I noticed something. The glowing symbols on the walls were pulsing faster now, in time with the creature's movements, and in the center of the chamber the air was beginning to ripple and distort. The portal, I gasped. It's opening. The creature let out a triumphant roar. Yes, they come. The great old ones return to claim what is theirs. The distortion grew, stretching into a vast, swirling vortex. And in its depths I caught glimpses of things that my mind couldn't, or wouldn't, fully process. Vast, alien shapes, cities that defied geometry, and eyes, countless eyes, all turning to focus on our world. We have to close it, Mia yelled over the growing roar of the portal. How do we close it? I racked my brain, trying to remember what I'd read in the journal. The ritual, I said. It needs to be reversed. But I don't know how. Jake was back at the altar now, helping Mia free my other arm. Well, figure it out fast. I don't think our squid-faced friend is going to let us leave to do some research. The creature was at the edge of the portal now, its form stretching and warping as it prepared to welcome its masters. Too late, humans, it crowed. The way is open. They are coming. As I sat up on the altar, my eyes fell on the ritual knife, which had fallen to the ground in the chaos. Suddenly, I knew what I had to do. The sacrifice, I said, reaching for the knife. It has to be undone. Mia's eyes widened as she realized what I was planning. Alex, no. There has to be another way. But I knew there wasn't. I had started this, let my curiosity and arrogance nearly doom the world. Now it was up to me to end it. I gripped the knife tightly, its weight heavy in my hand. I'm sorry, I said, looking at my friends. For everything. Take care of each other. Before they could stop me, I plunged the knife into my own chest. Pain exploded through me, white-hot and all-consuming. But with it came a surge of power, a connection to the forces we'd unleashed. I focused all my will on one thought. Close the gate. The creature screamed in rage and disbelief. No. What have you done? The portal began to shrink, the swirling energies collapsing in on themselves. The vast alien presences retreated, their chance at entering our world slipping away. As my vision began to fade, I saw the chamber crumbling around us. The creature that had been my doppelganger was being pulled into the collapsing portal, its form disintegrating. The last thing I heard was Jake and Mia calling my name, their voices fading as darkness claimed me. And then, nothing. Darkness. Endless, all-encompassing darkness. That's all I knew for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, pinpricks of light began to pierce the void. Sounds filtered in, muffled and distant at first, then growing clearer. Vital signs stabilizing. I think he's coming around. Alex? Alex, can you hear me? I struggled to open my eyes, my eyelids feeling as heavy as lead. When I finally managed to pry them open, I was greeted by a blinding white light. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust. As my vision cleared, I saw Jake and Mia leaning over me, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. Behind them, I could make out stark white walls and beeping machines. A hospital room. What? I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. Mia quickly held a cup of water to my lips, and I drank gratefully. Easy there, Jake said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. You've been out for a while. I swallowed, wincing at the pain in my throat. How long? Mia and Jake exchanged a look. 3 weeks, Mia said softly. We weren't sure you were going to wake up. The memories came flooding back in a rush. The forest, the ritual, the cave, the otherworldly chamber and the portal. My sacrifice. I looked down at my chest, half expecting to see a gaping wound. Instead, there was just a neat line of stitches, already healing. How? I croaked. I should be dead. Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. That's complicated. We're not entirely sure ourselves. A new voice joined the conversation. Perhaps I can help explain. I turned my head to see an elderly man in a tweed jacket standing in the doorway. He had a kind face, but his eyes held a depth of knowledge that made me shiver. Who are you? I asked. The man smiled, stepping into the room. My name is Dr. Elias Blackwood. I'm a professor of occult studies at Miskatonic University, and I believe we have much to discuss, Mr. Chen. Jake and Mia moved aside, allowing Dr. Blackwood to approach my bedside. He pulled up a chair and sat down, regarding me with intense curiosity. Your friends have told me quite a tale, he said, about your adventures in Shawnee Forest, the ritual you performed, and the entities you encountered. I felt a chill run down my spine. You believe them? Dr. Blackwood's smile turned sad. My dear boy, I've spent my entire life studying such phenomena. The things that lurk in the shadows, the realities that exist beyond our own. What you experienced is all too real, I'm afraid. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. Part of me had hoped it had all been some vivid hallucination, a product of fear and exhaustion. But hearing this man confirm it made it impossible to deny. The portal, I said, opening my eyes to look at the professor. Did I close it? He nodded solemnly. You did. Your sacrifice was effective. The breach between worlds has been sealed, at least for now. But how did I survive? I asked. I stabbed myself in the heart. I felt myself dying. Dr. Blackwood leaned forward, his voice lowering. The human body is a remarkable thing, Mr. Chen, especially when exposed to certain energies. Your proximity to the portal, combined with the ritual energies you had absorbed, created a unique set of circumstances. You were, for lack of a better term, caught between life and death, between our world and theirs. I shuddered, remembering the endless darkness. So what brought me back? The professor's eyes twinkled. Your friends, primarily. They refused to give up on you, even when the doctors had all but written you off. They've been here every day, talking to you, willing you to come back. I looked at Jake and Mia, feeling a lump form in my throat. After everything I'd put them through, they had still stood by me. Guys, I started, but Jake held up a hand. Save it, he said gruffly, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. You scared the hell out of us, but you also saved our asses. Consider us even. Mia nodded, wiping away a tear. We're just glad you're back. Dr. Blackwood cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt this touching moment, but there are some things we need to discuss. Urgently. His tone made me tense up. What things? The professor's face grew serious. Your experience has changed you, Mr. Chen. Your exposure to those other realms, to the entities that dwell there, has left its mark. What do you mean, changed me? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. Dr. Blackwood sighed. It's difficult to explain. You've become sensitive to things most people can't perceive. The veil between worlds is thinner for you now, and I'm afraid that connection goes both ways. Jake stepped forward, his posture protective. What are you saying, Doc? That those things can still get to him? The professor nodded gravely. I'm afraid so. The portal may be closed, but Mr. Chen himself has become a sort of beacon. Those entities will be drawn to him now, and they will not have given up on their plans to enter our world. I felt the blood drain from my face. So what do we do? Dr. Blackwood stood up, straightening his jacket. We prepare. We train you to understand and control these new abilities, and we make sure you're ready for what's coming. Mia's voice was small but determined. We'll help, whatever it takes. Jake nodded in agreement. Yeah, we're in this together now. No way we're letting you face this alone. I looked at my friends, feeling a mix of gratitude and guilt. Guys, you don't have to do this, it's too dangerous. Jake snorted. After what we've been through, a little danger isn't going to scare us off. Dr. Blackwood smiled. Loyalty like that is rare and precious. You're lucky to have such friends, Mr. Chen. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I know. The professor clapped his hands together. Well then, once you're sufficiently recovered, we'll begin your training. Miskatonic University has resources that will be invaluable in preparing you for what's to come. As Dr. Blackwood talked about arrangements and plans, I found my mind wandering. I thought about the forest, about the other Alex, about the glimpses I'd had of realities beyond our own. Part of me was terrified of what lay ahead. But another part, a part I was almost ashamed to admit to, was excited. I had wanted knowledge, wanted to uncover the secrets of the universe. Well, I had gotten my wish, in a way I could never have imagined. And now it seemed, my real journey was just beginning. As I lay there in that hospital bed, surrounded by my loyal friends and this enigmatic professor, I realized that my life had been irrevocably changed. The Alex who had entered Shawnee Forest that night was gone. In his place was someone new, someone marked by forces beyond human comprehension. The question was, what would I do with this new life I'd been given? Would I be able to protect our world from the horrors I'd glimpsed? Or would I end up being the key that unlocked the door to our destruction? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. 6 months had passed since that fateful night in Shawnee Forest. 6 months of recovery, of training, of coming to terms with my new reality. Dr. Blackwood had been true to his word, bringing us to Miskatonic University and introducing us to a world hidden from most of humanity. I stood in front of a full-length mirror in my dormitory room, staring at my reflection. On the surface, I looked much the same as I always had, but my eyes, there was a depth to them now, a knowledge that set me apart from the person I used to be. A knock on the door broke me from my reverie. Alex, you ready? It was Mia's voice. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Yeah, coming. I opened the door to find Mia and Jake waiting in the hallway. They too had changed in the past months. There was a wariness to them now, a constant alertness that came from knowing what lurked in the shadows. "Big day," Jake said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You sure you're up for this?" I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. As ready as I'll ever be. We made our way through the winding corridors of Miskatonic's Occult Studies Department. The walls were lined with artifacts and tomes that would have seemed like props in a horror movie just a year ago. Now I knew all too well how real and dangerous they were. Dr. Blackwood was waiting for us in his office, a vast room filled with books and strange objects. He looked up as we entered, his face grave. "Ah, good. You're here," he said, standing up from behind his cluttered desk. "Are you prepared, Mr. Chen?" I swallowed hard. "I think so, Professor. You're sure this is necessary?" The old man's eyes softened. "I'm afraid it is, my boy. Your connection to the other side is growing stronger. If we don't take control of it now, it could overwhelm you, and that would be catastrophic." I knew he was right. Over the past months, I'd been experiencing increasingly vivid visions and dreams. Sometimes, even when I was awake, I'd catch glimpses of other realities overlapping our own. It was disorienting and terrifying. "So what exactly is going to happen?" Mia asked, her voice tinged with worry. Dr. Blackwood gestured to a strange contraption in the corner of the room. It looked like a cross between an antique dentist's chair and something out of a steampunk novel, covered in dials and wires. "This device will allow us to guide Alex's consciousness across the veil," he explained. "He'll be able to explore the other side in a controlled manner, hopefully gaining some mastery over his abilities in the process." Jake eyed the machine skeptically. "And you're sure it's safe?" The professor's hesitation was not reassuring. "As safe as anything involving interdimensional travel can be. We've taken every precaution." I stepped towards the chair, my heart pounding. "Let's do this." As Dr. Blackwood began attaching electrodes to my head and chest, Mia grabbed my hand. "Be careful in there, okay? Come back to us." I squeezed her hand, managing a weak smile. "I will, I promise." Jake stood by, trying to look nonchalant but unable to hide his concern. "Just remember what we practiced. Stay focused. Don't let anything trick you." I nodded, settling back into the chair. Dr. Blackwood placed a strange helmet on my head, covered in more wires and glowing runes. "Now, Alex," he said, his voice taking on a soothing tone, "I want you to close your eyes and focus on your breathing. Feel yourself sinking deeper and deeper into relaxation." I did as he instructed, letting my consciousness drift. I was vaguely aware of the professor's voice continuing to guide me, of the hum of the machine around me. And then, suddenly, everything changed. I opened my eyes to find myself elsewhere. The world around me was a swirling chaos of colors and shapes that hurt to look at directly. Impossible geometries stretched in every direction, and the very air seemed alive with strange energies. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely. "Can anyone hear me?" "We hear you, Alex," came Dr. Blackwood's voice, sounding distant and distorted. "Remember your training. Try to impose some order on your surroundings." I took a deep breath, focusing my will. Slowly, the chaos around me began to coalesce into something more recognizable. I found myself standing on what appeared to be a stone pathway, stretching out through a vast, alien landscape. "Good. Very good," the professor's voice encouraged. "Now move forward, explore, but be cautious." I started walking, trying to take in my surroundings without letting my mind be overwhelmed. The sky above me was a roiling mass of colors I had no names for. Strange plants, or perhaps creatures, lined the path, pulsing with an inner light. As I walked, I began to hear whispers. At first, they were too faint to make out, but they grew louder with each step. "The key," they hissed. "The gateway. He returns." I quickened my pace, my heart racing. "Professor?" I called out. "I think something's aware of me." "Stay calm," Dr. Blackwood's voice replied, sounding fainter now. Remember, you have control here. Suddenly, the path in front of me split into three. Each branch led to a different, equally impossible vista. I hesitated, unsure which way to go. Choose, the whispers urged. Choose and become. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself. When I opened them, I nearly stumbled back in shock. Standing before me was myself, or rather, three versions of myself. The first Alex looked just as I had before that night in the forest, innocent, curious, unaware of the vastness of the universe. The second was the Alex I'd seen in the cave, corrupted by knowledge and power. And the third was something else entirely, neither fully human nor fully other, balanced between worlds. "What is this?" I demanded. "What's going on?" The innocent Alex spoke first, his voice painfully naive. "We can go back, forget all of this, live a normal life." The corrupted Alex sneered. "Power awaits us. We can reshape reality itself. Why limit ourselves to one paltry existence?" The third Alex, the balanced one, simply watched me with eyes that held infinite sadness and wisdom. I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the choice before me. Part of me longed for the simplicity of my old life, to forget the horrors I'd witnessed. Another part was tempted by the promise of power, of transcending human limitations. "Alex?" It was Mia's voice, faint but clear. "Alex, your vitals are spiking. Whatever's happening, stay strong. Remember who you are." Her words cut through my confusion. I looked at the three versions of myself and realized the truth. They were all me, all parts of who I was and could be. "I choose unbalance," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I accept what I've become, but I won't let it control me. I'll use this power to protect, not to dominate." As I spoke, the three figures merged into one, into me. I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, a sense of clarity I'd never experienced before. The whispers rose to a crescendo, no longer threatening, but almost respectful. The choice is made. The balance is struck. Suddenly, the world around me began to fade. I felt myself being pulled back across the veil, back to my own reality. I gasped as my eyes flew open, finding myself back in Dr. Blackwood's office. Mia and Jake were at my side instantly, helping me sit up as the professor removed the electrodes. "Alex, are you okay?" Mia asked, her face pale with worry. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." Dr. Blackwood leaned in, his eyes bright with curiosity. "What happened? What did you see?" As I recounted my experience, I could see the awe and concern on their faces. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Jake spoke up. "So, what does this mean? For you, for us, for everything?" I stood up, feeling steadier than I had in months. "It means we have work to do. There are forces out there that want to use me as a gateway, but now I know I can resist them. More than that, I can fight back." Dr. Blackwood nodded solemnly. "Indeed, your journey is far from over, Mr. Chen, but I believe you've taken a crucial step today." As we left the professor's office, I felt a new sense of purpose. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges I could scarcely imagine. But for the first time since that night in the forest, I felt truly ready to face them. The other side had shown me who I was, who I could be. Now it was up to me to live up to that potential, to be the guardian between worlds that I was meant to be. And with my friends by my side, I knew I stood a fighting chance. The tear in reality pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting sickly hues across the forest floor. I clawed my way through, feeling as if my very essence was being pulled apart and stitched back together. With a sickening lurch, I tumbled onto the damp earth of our world, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin, too pure. As my vision cleared, the scene before me came into focus. The clearing was a charnel house. Bodies of the cultists lay strewn about. their robes torn and stained with blood that looked almost black in the pale moonlight. Some were twisted into impossible shapes, as if their bones had liquefied and reformed. Others seemed to have aged decades in moments, withered husks with expressions of abject terror frozen on their faces. I staggered to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered me, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. As I surveyed the carnage, my eyes fell upon a familiar face among the dead. My traitorous friend, the one who had held the ritual dagger, lay sprawled across one of the stone altars. Their eyes were wide open, staring sightlessly at the star-studded sky above. I approached cautiously, half expecting them to spring to life. But as I drew closer, I saw the truth. Whatever cosmic force they had sought to control had turned on them, leaving behind only an empty shell. "You fool," I whispered, a mix of pity and anger welling up inside me. "What did you think would happen?" A weak groan from the edge of the clearing snapped me back to attention. I spun around, heart racing, and saw a hand reaching out from behind a gnarled tree trunk. "Help, please." I recognized that voice. "Mark?" I called out, rushing towards the sound. "Mark, is that you?" As I rounded the tree, I found my loyal friend, the one who had stood by me through this nightmare. He was pale, covered in dirt and blood, but alive. I fell to my knees beside him, checking for injuries. "Jesus, Mark, what happened to you?" I asked, helping him sit up against the tree. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that sent a chill down my spine. They tried to use me as a sacrifice," he managed to say between labored breaths. "But something went wrong. The thing they summoned, it turned on them." I nodded grimly. "I saw. They're all dead now." Mark's eyes widened. "All of them? Even Sarah?" The name of our traitorous friend hung in the air between us. I simply nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "We need to get out of here," I said after a moment, glancing nervously at the shadows that seemed to writhe at the edge of my vision. "Can you walk?" Mark grimaced but nodded. "I think so. Just give me a hand up." I pulled him to his feet, letting him lean on me as we began our slow trek out of the clearing. Every step was a struggle, both of us battered and exhausted beyond measure. The forest around us felt different now, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. As we stumbled through the underbrush, Mark suddenly tensed. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears, listening intently. At first, there was nothing but the usual forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. But then I heard it too, a low, guttural sound that was decidedly not of this world. "We need to move faster," I urged, picking up our pace despite Mark's pained gasps. We pushed on through the darkness, the strange noises growing closer with each passing minute. Branches clawed at our clothes. Roots seemed to rise up to trip us, and more than once I could have sworn I saw shapes moving just beyond the reach of our flashlight's beam. "Talk to me, Mark," I said, trying to keep him conscious and distract myself from the growing dread. "What do you remember about what happened?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I feared he might have passed out. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was Sarah. She told us she'd found something incredible in these woods, some kind of ancient power. We thought she was crazy at first, but then she started showing us things. Impossible things." I nodded, remembering the strange symbols, the journal, the way reality itself had seemed to bend around us. "And you didn't think to tell me?" Mark coughed again, a painful sound. "She swore us to secrecy, said you wouldn't understand, that you'd try to stop us. I'm so sorry. I should have known better." Before I could respond, a blood-curdling shriek pierced the night air. It was close, too close. We froze, holding our breath as we listened for any sign of movement. "What was that?" Mark whispered, his face pale with fear. I shook my head. I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Come on, we're almost there. We pressed on, our progress agonizingly slow. The forest seemed to be actively working against us now, the path ahead growing more treacherous with each step. Strange whispers echoed through the trees, and more than once I caught glimpses of eyes gleaming in the darkness. Finally, after what felt like hours, we saw it, the edge of the forest, a thin line of lighter darkness ahead where the trees gave way to open fields. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. We're almost there, Mark, I said, urging him forward. Just a little further. But as we approached the forest's edge, a wave of wrongness washed over me. The air shimmered like a heat haze, and for a moment I could see through to the other side. But it wasn't the familiar countryside we'd driven through to get here. Instead, I saw a twisted landscape of impossible geometry and writhing shadows. I blinked, and the vision was gone. But the feeling of otherworldly wrongness remained. Do you feel that? I asked Mark. He nodded weakly. Something's different. Changed. We stood at the threshold between the forest and the world beyond, hesitating. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that if we stepped across that invisible line, nothing would ever be the same again. We can't stay here, Mark said, voicing what we both knew to be true. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Together, then? He nodded, and we stepped forward as one. The moment we crossed the boundary, it felt as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. The world around us was familiar, fields stretching out towards distant lights of civilization. But it was as if I was seeing it all for the first time. Colors seemed more vivid, shadows deeper, and the stars above burned with an intensity that was almost painful to behold. We stumbled forward, putting distance between ourselves and the forest that now loomed behind us like a dark sentinel. As we walked, I became aware of a presence following us. Not the monstrous entities from the other side, but something more subtle. A weight of knowledge, of experience, that clung to us like a second skin. We made it, Mark said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. We actually made it out. I nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. Yeah, but at what cost? As if in answer to my question, a car appeared on the horizon, its headlights cutting through the darkness. We waved it down, grateful for any sign of normal human life. The car slowed to a stop beside us, and the driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, rolled down her window. "Are you two all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "You look like you've been through hell." Mark and I exchanged a glance, a wealth of unspoken understanding passing between us. How could we even begin to explain what we'd experienced? "We got lost in the woods," I said finally, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Had a bit of an accident. Could you give us a lift to the nearest town?" The woman hesitated for a moment, eyeing our disheveled appearance before nodding. "Of course. Hop in." As we settled into the back seat of her car, the warmth and normalcy of it all felt almost surreal after what we'd been through. But even as we drove away from the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out, something that would never let us truly escape. I caught Mark's eye, seeing my own mix of relief and lingering dread reflected there. We had survived, yes, but the price of our return was yet to be fully paid. The horrors we'd witnessed, the truths we'd glimpsed about the nature of reality, these things would stay with us forever, changing us in ways we had yet to fully understand. And somewhere in the depths of my mind, in a place I was afraid to examine too closely, I knew that our journey was far from over. The boundary between worlds had been breached, and the echoes of that violation would ripple out in ways we couldn't possibly predict. As the car sped towards the promise of civilization and safety, I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, trying to find solace in the rhythmic hum of the engine. But behind my eyelids, I still saw the swirling vortex of that otherworldly realm. and in the back of my mind I heard the whispers of things that should not be. We had escaped the forest, but the real nightmare, the long, slow unraveling of everything we thought we knew about the world, was only just beginning. The ancient bus wheezed to a stop, its brakes screaming in protest. I peered out the grimy window, taking in my first glimpse of Camp Nighthawk. Towering pines stretched as far as the eye could see, their branches swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze. The air smelled of pine sap and wood smoke, a stark contrast to the city's exhaust fumes I'd left behind. "All right, campers," a cheery voice boomed from the front of the bus. "Welcome to your home for the next 8 weeks." I hefted my duffel bag onto my shoulder and shuffled down the aisle with the other kids. As I stepped off the bus, the gravel crunching under my sneakers, I took a deep breath. The crisp, pine-scented air filled my lungs, and for a moment, I felt a surge of excitement. "Hey, you must be Jake." A tall, freckle-faced counselor with a mop of red hair bounded up to me, grinning from ear to ear. "I'm Mike, your cabin leader. Let's get you settled in." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Thanks, Mike." "Where to?" My unease. I shrugged. "Yeah, just getting used to the place, I guess." Mike chuckled. "Don't worry, you'll feel right at home in no time. Here we are, cabin 13. Great, cabin 13. Because that wasn't ominous at all. Inside, I claimed a bottom bunk and started unpacking. The cabin smelled of pine and musty sleeping bags. As I shoved my clothes into a small dresser, I heard a twig snap just outside the window. I whirled around, heart pounding, but saw nothing but the dense forest beyond. "Did you see that?" I asked Tommy, my bunkmate who was arranging his Pokemon cards on his bed. "See what?" Tommy looked up, confused. I shook my head. "Never mind. Probably just a squirrel or something." As the afternoon wore on, more kids arrived, filling the cabin with chatter and laughter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the woods. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see something, but there was never anything there. As the sun began to set, Mike rounded us up for the welcome campfire. We gathered in a large clearing where other cabins were already assembled. The crackling fire cast dancing shadows across excited faces, but the darkness beyond the firelight seemed to press in around us. Camp Director Dave, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice, stood up to address us. "Welcome to Camp Nighthawk, everyone. We're going to have an amazing summer filled with adventure, friendship, and..." I tuned out as he droned on about camp rules and activities. My attention was drawn to the edge of the clearing where the firelight faded into inky blackness. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing just beyond the light's reach. I blinked, and it was gone. "Hey, you okay?" whispered Sarah, the girl sitting next to me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh. "No, just thought I saw something in the woods. Tricks of the light, you know?" Sarah nodded, but her eyes darted nervously to the tree line. "Yeah, sure. Tricks of the light." As we made our way back to the cabins after the campfire, the forest seemed to close in around us. The beam of Mike's flashlight cut through the darkness, but it only seemed to emphasize how dark it was beyond its reach. "Stick together, guys," Mike called out cheerfully, but I detected a note of tension in his voice. "Don't want anyone getting lost on their first night." Back in the cabin, I climbed into my bunk, exhausted but wired. The events of the day swirled in my mind, and every creak of the old building made me jump. "Night, everyone," Mike called out as he flicked off the lights. "Big day tomorrow." I lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest, wind in the trees, an owl hooting, something scratching at the cabin wall. Probably just a branch, right? I must have dozed off eventually because suddenly I was running through the forest. Trees loomed on all sides, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands trying to grab me. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I ran faster, my lungs burning, but I knew I couldn't outrun it forever. Finally, I burst into a clearing, moonlight illuminating a still lake. I turned around, ready to face my pursuer, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a man, tall, dressed in what looked like an old park ranger uniform, but where his face should have been, there was only a smooth, blank expanse of skin. I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft breathing of the other boys. I lay there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but it had felt so real. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I heard whispers from the bunk above me. "I'm telling you I saw him," a voice I recognized as Tommy's said urgently, "standing right at the edge of the trees watching us." "You're full of it," another voice replied. "It was probably just a shadow or something." "No way, man, he didn't have a face, just blank, like it had been erased." I felt my blood run cold. Slowly, I sat up, peering over the edge of Tommy's bunk. "What did you say?" I whispered. Tommy and the other boy, Alex, looked at me with wide eyes. "You heard that?" Tommy asked nervously. I nodded. The faceless man. I think I saw him too, and I had a nightmare about him." The three of us stared at each other in the dim morning light, a shared understanding passing between us. Something wasn't right at Camp Nighthawk, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning. "We should tell Mike," Alex suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Tommy shook his head vehemently. "No way. They'll just think we're making it up, or trying to scare the younger kids." "So what do we do?" I asked, voicing the question that hung heavy in the air. Before anyone could answer, Mike's cheerful voice rang out through the cabin. "Rise and shine, campers, time for breakfast and our first full day of camp activities." As the cabin erupted into the chaos of boys getting dressed and ready for the day, Tommy, Alex, and I exchanged one last meaningful look. We didn't know what was going on, but we knew one thing for certain. This summer at Camp Nighthawk was going to be unlike anything we had ever experienced. And as I followed the others out into the bright morning sunshine, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the dense forest surrounding us, a pair of non-existent eyes were watching our every move. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow path ahead. Behind me, a line of chattering campers stretched out, their own lights bobbing like fireflies in the night. "All right, gang," I called out, trying to keep my voice cheerful and steady. "Keep your eyes peeled for any nocturnal creatures. Owls, raccoons, maybe even a deer if we're lucky." "What about bears, Counselor Jenny?" a small voice piped up from the back of the group. I chuckled, hoping it didn't sound as nervous as I felt. "Don't worry, Tim. Bears are more afraid of us than we are of them. Just stick close to the group, and we'll be fine." As we ventured deeper into the woods, the sounds of the night seemed to intensify. Crickets chirped incessantly, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted mournfully. The trees loomed over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every few steps I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something. But there was never anything there, just shadows and more shadows. "Hey, Jenny," my fellow counselor Mark sidled up beside me. "You seem a bit on edge. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just, making sure we don't lose any kids out here." Mark nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Right. Well, let me know if you need anything." As he fell back to check on the rear of the group, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off my unease. It was just a night hike. We'd done dozens of these before. Nothing to worry about. That's when I heard it. A sharp intake of breath, followed by a blood-curdling scream that shattered the night. I whirled around, my heart pounding. What's wrong? Who screamed? The line of campers had broken formation, kids clustering together in frightened groups. At the very back, a young girl named Emily was sobbing hysterically, pointing into the darkness beyond the trail. I rushed over, kneeling beside her. "Emily, what is it? What did you see?" Between gasping sobs, she managed to choke out, "A man following us, but he didn't have a face." A chill ran down my spine. I looked up at Mark, who had also rushed over, His face was pale in the flashlight's glow. "Okay, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're heading back to camp now. Stay close together, and no one leaves the group. Understood?" A chorus of frightened agreements answered me. As we turned to head back, I couldn't help but scan the darkness around us. Was that a flicker of movement between the trees? A shadow that didn't quite match the others? The return journey seemed to take an eternity. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us jumping. Emily had calmed down somewhat, but she clung to Mark's hand like a lifeline, her eyes wide and fearful. As we finally emerged from the tree line, the warm glow of the camp's lights felt like a beacon of safety. I did one last head count, relief washing over me as I confirmed all campers were accounted for. "All right, everyone," I announced, mustering as much cheerfulness as I could. "That's enough excitement for one night. Back to your cabins, and we'll see you bright and early for breakfast." As the kids dispersed, still whispering nervously among themselves, Mark pulled me aside. "Jenny, what the hell was that about?" he asked in a low voice. "A man with no face? Come on." I shrugged, feeling suddenly exhausted. "I don't know, Mark. Kids have wild imaginations, especially in the dark. Emily probably saw a shadow or something and got spooked." But even as I said it, I couldn't quite convince myself. The terror in Emily's eyes had been too real, too raw to be just imagination. "Maybe," Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced either. "We should probably mention this to Dave in the morning just in case." I nodded, grateful for his level-headedness. "Good idea. For now, let's just try to get some sleep." As I made my way back to my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I told myself it was just the residual adrenaline from the scare, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Inside my cabin, I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed, exhausted but wired. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's terrified face, heard her describing the faceless man. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sudden chill. Groggily, I sat up, wondering if I'd left a window open. That's when I saw it. The cabin door was wide open, swinging gently in the night breeze. My heart leaped into my throat. I was sure I'd locked it before going to bed. I always did. Slowly, I got out of bed, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. As I approached the door, I could hear the night sounds of the forest, crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. But underneath it all, there was something else. A soft, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. In one quick motion, I stepped outside, ready to confront whatever was out there. The night air was cool on my skin, the moon casting long shadows across the camp. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then, movement caught my eye. At the edge of the forest, a tall figure stood motionless. In the moonlight, I could make out what looked like an old-fashioned ranger's uniform. But where the face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse. I blinked hard, certain I must be dreaming. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone, melting into the mist that had begun to roll in from the forest. For a long moment I stood there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen? Or was my mind playing tricks on me, influenced by Emily's story and the strange atmosphere of the camp? Shakily, I closed and locked the door, double-checking it this time. As I climbed back into bed, I knew sleep would be a long time coming. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. In the morning, I told myself I'd talk to Dave. We'd figure this out. There had to be a logical explanation for all of this. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night, a part of me knew that logic might not have anything to do with what was happening at Camp Nighthawk. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much, much bigger than a simple camp ghost story. The musty smell of old paper filled my nostrils as I rifled through yet another box of camp records. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight, the only illumination in the cramped storage room beneath the mess hall. I'd been at it for hours, searching for any mention of a faceless man or strange occurrences at Camp Nighthawk. This is pointless, I muttered to myself, pushing aside a stack of faded attendance sheets from the 1980s. But I couldn't stop. Not after what I'd seen last night. Not after Emily's terrified screams during the night hike. Just as I was about to call it quits, a yellowed newspaper clipping caught my eye. The headline read, "Tragic Fire Claims Life of Beloved Park Ranger." My heart raced as I scanned the article, dated July 15, 1952. Ranger John Hawkins, 42, presumed dead. Heroic efforts to evacuate campers. Body never recovered. Holy shit, I whispered, my hands shaking as I read the article again. A knock at the door made me jump, nearly dropping my flashlight. "Sarah? You still down there?" It was Mike, the head counselor. I quickly folded the newspaper clipping and shoved it into my pocket. "Yeah, just finishing up," I called back, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. As I emerged from the storage room, blinking in the bright sunlight, Mike gave me a concerned look. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Just dusty down there. Find anything interesting about the camp's history?" Mike shrugged. "Not really. Why the sudden interest anyway?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Just curious, I guess. Hey, do you know if there are any old-timers around here? Someone who might know about the camp's past?" Mike scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, there's Old Man Jenkins. Lives just outside the park. He's been around forever. Used to work here back in the day. But Sarah, what's this really about?" I sighed, knowing I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. "Mike, something weird is going on here. The kids are seeing things. I'm seeing things. I think the camp might be haunted." Mike's eyebrows shot up. "Haunted? Come on, Sarah. You can't be serious." "I know how it sounds," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "But I need answers. Can you take me to see Jenkins?" Mike looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But this better not be some elaborate prank for the campers." An hour later, we were pulling up to a weathered cabin on the outskirts of Harriman State Park. An old man sat on the porch, his wrinkled face lighting up as he saw us approach. "Well, well," he called out in a gravelly voice. "If it ain't Mike from the camp, what brings you out to visit old Jenkins?" Mike introduced me, and we settled onto the porch. Jenkins offered us lemonade, his roomy eyes twinkling with curiosity. "So," he said, settling back in his rocking chair, "what can I do for you young folks?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Jenkins, we were hoping you could tell us about the history of Camp Nighthawk, particularly any strange occurrences or legends." Jenkins' bushy eyebrows furrowed. "Strange occurrences, you say? Why do you ask?" I glanced at Mike, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been seeing things, or rather, someone, a man without a face." The change in Jenkins was immediate. The color drained from his face and his hands began to tremble. "You've seen him," he whispered. "After all these years, he's back." Mike leaned forward. "Who's back, Mr. Jenkins?" The old man's eyes seemed to look right through us, lost in memories. "John Hawkins. He was a ranger here, back in '52. Best damn ranger we ever had. Until the fire." I pulled out the newspaper clipping. "Is this him?" Jenkins nodded slowly. "That's John, all right. It was a terrible night. Fire broke out in the North Woods. John, he went in to evacuate a group of campers. Got them all out safe, but he never came back." I finished softly. "No, he didn't," Jenkins said, his voice thick with emotion. "We searched for days but never found a trace, except..." "Except what?" Mike pressed. Jenkins sighed heavily. "His badge. We found it at the edge of the burn zone. Melted, twisted, like it had been through hell itself." A chill ran down my spine. "Mr. Jenkins, have there been sightings over the years?" The old man nodded slowly. Whispers, rumors, campers seeing a ranger in the woods at night, but never like this. Never so present. As we drove back to camp, my mind was reeling. Mike was unusually quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You believe it now, don't you?" I asked softly. Mike didn't answer for a long moment. "I don't know what to believe," he finally said, "but I know we can't ignore this." That night, I tossed and turned in my bunk, unable to shake the image of John Hawkins, engulfed in flames, his face melting away. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were a confused jumble of fire and faceless figures. I jolted awake, heart pounding. The cabin was dark and quiet, but something felt off. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed a faint glow coming from my bedside table. Slowly, I reached out. My fingers touched metal, warm to the touch. I drew back with a gasp, fumbling for my flashlight. In the beam of light, I saw it. A ranger's badge, twisted and charred, still faintly glowing as if it had just been pulled from a fire. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice shaking. As the implications of what I was seeing sank in, I knew that everything had changed. This wasn't just a ghost story anymore. This was real, and it was happening now. I clutched the badge, its heat seeming to pulse in rhythm with my racing heart. Whatever was haunting Camp Nighthawk, whatever unfinished business John Hawkins had, it was clear now that I was at the center of it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the cabin windows, I made a decision. I had to get to the bottom of this, for the sake of the campers, for the camp itself, and for the restless spirit of John Hawkins. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, the badge clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far darker and more dangerous than I could possibly imagine. And somewhere in the forests of Camp Nighthawk, I knew the faceless man was waiting. I stood at the front of the mess hall, facing a sea of anxious faces. The low murmur of whispered conversations filled the air, punctuated by the occasional nervous laugh. As head counselor, it was my job to address the growing panic about the faceless man sightings. But how could I reassure them when I wasn't so sure myself? "All right, everyone, settle down," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to me. "I know there have been some unusual occurrences lately. I've heard the rumors, and I understand you're scared." Sarah, one of the junior counselors, caught my eye from the back of the room. She nodded encouragingly, but I could see the worry etched on her face. "But I want to assure you," I continued, "that there's nothing to be afraid of. Camp Nighthawk is perfectly safe. What we're dealing with here is simply an overactive imagination fueled by ghost stories and shadows in the woods." A hand shot up from the middle of the room. It belonged to Emily, the girl who'd screamed during the night hike. "But Mr. Mike," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I saw him. The man with no face. He was real." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "Emily, I understand what you think you saw, but our eyes can play tricks on us, especially in the dark. What you probably saw was a shadow, or maybe even a deer." "It wasn't a deer," Emily protested, her eyes welling up with tears. "He was tall and he wore a ranger's uniform and where his face should have been." "That's enough, Emily," I cut her off, perhaps a bit too sharply. I softened my tone. "I know it seemed real to you, but I promise you, there are no faceless men wandering around our camp." As I continued to address the crowd, assuring them of their safety and outlining new security measures, I couldn't help but feel like a hypocrite. The truth was, I was just as unsettled as they were. The story Sarah had told me about the old ranger, the badge she'd found, it all seemed too coincidental to dismiss entirely. After the meeting, Sarah cornered me outside the mess hall. "Mike, what are you doing?" she hissed. "You know there's something going on here. Why are you denying it?" I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling up inside me. "What do you want me to do, Sarah? Tell everyone the camp is haunted by the ghost of a dead ranger?" We'd have mass panic. Parents would be pulling their kids out left and right. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. So you'd rather let them think they're going crazy? That what they're seeing isn't real? I sighed heavily. Look, I'm not saying I believe all this ghost stuff, but even if it is true, we need to handle this carefully. These are kids we're talking about. We have a responsibility to keep them safe and calm. And what if denying it puts them in more danger? Sarah challenged. I didn't have an answer for that. That night, determined to put an end to this madness once and for all, I set up a series of cameras around the camp perimeter. If there really was something out there, we'd catch it on film. As I finished setting up the last camera, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Whoa, easy there, boss, Dave, one of the other counselors, said with a chuckle. Didn't mean to startle you. I forced a laugh, trying to slow my racing pulse. No problem. Just finishing up here. Dave eyed the camera curiously. What's with the surveillance? Worried about bears? Something like that, I muttered. Just a precaution. Dave nodded, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Right. Well, don't stay out too late. You look like you could use some sleep. As he walked away, I couldn't help but feel a prickle of unease. Was I letting this whole thing get to me? Was I becoming as paranoid as the campers? The next morning, I sat alone in my office, reviewing the footage from the night before. Hours of nothing but darkness and the occasional rustling of leaves. I was just about to call it quits when something on the screen caught my eye. At the edge of the frame, barely visible in the gloom, a figure moved. It was tall, unnaturally so, and seemed to glide rather than walk. As it turned towards the camera, my blood ran cold. Where its face should have been, there was only a blank, featureless expanse. No, I whispered, my hands shaking as I rewound the footage. This can't be real. I played it again, frame by frame. There was no denying what I was seeing. The faceless man was real. A knock at the door made me jump. I quickly closed the video player as Sarah poked her head in. Mike, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, her tone half joking, half concerned. For a moment, I considered telling her what I'd seen, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I forced a smile. Just tired. Late night. Sarah's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Find anything on those cameras of yours? I shook my head, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Nothing. Just like I said, there's nothing out there. As Sarah left, closing the door behind her, I turned back to my computer. My finger hovered over the delete button. Part of me screamed to show someone, to prove that I wasn't going crazy. But a larger part, the part responsible for the safety and sanity of everyone at Camp Nighthawk, made the decision for me. With a click, the video was gone. I leaned back in my chair, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. What had I just done? Was I protecting the camp, or was I putting everyone in danger by hiding the truth? As the day wore on, I found myself jumping at every shadow, scrutinizing every face I passed. The weight of what I'd seen and what I'd done pressed down on me like a physical thing. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of the faceless man from my mind. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a glitch in the camera. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there in the woods surrounding Camp Nighthawk. Something that defied explanation. And by denying its existence, by hiding the evidence, I might have just made things worse. As I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. What have I done? And more importantly, what was I going to do now? The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the campground. I stood at the edge of the clearing, clipboard in hand, conducting the daily head count. It was a routine task, one I'd done hundreds of times before. But today something felt off. "All right, Cabin 7, I called out, my voice carrying across the morning air. Sound off. One by one, the campers called out their names. Jimmy, Sarah, Alex, Emily. I ticked them off my list, a growing sense of unease building in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I counted again, my heart beginning to race. "Where's Tommy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The campers looked around, confusion etched on their faces. Emily, a small girl with pigtails, spoke up. "He was here at breakfast, Miss Lisa. I saw him eating his cereal." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay, kids, stay here with Counselor Mike. I'm going to check the cabin." As I hurried towards cabin 7, Mike fell into step beside me. "What's going on, Lisa?" he asked, his voice low. "Tommy's missing," I replied, my words clipped with worry. "He wasn't at the head count." Mike's face paled. "You don't think—" I cut him off. "Let's not jump to conclusions. He probably just wandered off to use the bathroom or something." But as we searched the cabin, finding Tommy's bunk neatly made and his backpack still in place, that sliver of hope began to fade. "Mike," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to organize a search party. Now." The next few hours were a blur of activity. We split the counselors and older campers into groups, each taking a section of the surrounding forest. The younger kids were kept in the mess hall, their worried chatter a constant backdrop to our frantic efforts. I found myself deep in the woods calling Tommy's name until my voice was hoarse. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, made me jump. "Tommy!" I called out for what felt like the 1,000th time. "Tommy, can you hear me?" Only the echo of my own voice answered me. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, a sense of desperation began to set in. Where could he be? How could a child simply vanish in broad daylight? That's when I saw it. A flash of light in the gathering gloom. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. There, half hidden by a fallen log, was a flashlight. Tommy's flashlight. I picked it up with trembling hands, its beam cutting through the mist that had begun to roll in. "I found something," I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. Within minutes, the other search parties had converged on my location. Mike took the flashlight from me, his face grim. "It's Tommy's all right," he confirmed. I recognized the Power Rangers sticker. A heavy silence fell over the group. The implications of finding the flashlight here, so deep in the woods, were too terrible to voice. "We need to keep searching," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "He has to be around here somewhere." But as night fell, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold, even I had to admit defeat. We couldn't risk the safety of the other searchers in the dark, unfamiliar woods. As we trudged back to camp, the weight of failure pressed down on me like a physical thing. How was I going to face Tommy's parents? How could I explain that their son had vanished under my watch? The camp was eerily quiet as we returned. The younger campers had been put to bed, but I could see lights on in several cabins. News of Tommy's disappearance had spread, and I knew sleep would be elusive for many tonight. I was about to head to the office to make the dreaded call to Tommy's parents when a sound stopped me in my tracks. Laughter. A child's laughter echoing through the night air. "Did you hear that?" I asked Mike, who was walking beside me. He nodded, his face a mask of confusion. "It sounded like... but it couldn't be." We broke into a run, following the sound to cabin 7. I burst through the door, my heart pounding, and there, sitting on his bunk as if he'd never left, was Tommy. "Tommy!" I cried, relief and disbelief warring in my voice. "Where have you been? We've been searching for you all day." Tommy looked up at me, his eyes wide with innocence. "What do you mean, Miss Lisa? I've been here the whole time." I exchanged a bewildered look with Mike. "Tommy," Mike said gently, "you weren't here during the head count this morning. We've had search parties out in the woods all day looking for you." Tommy's brow furrowed in confusion. "But I was at breakfast. I remember eating my cereal. And then..." And then he trailed off, his face scrunching up as if trying to recall a distant memory. And then what, Tommy? I prompted, kneeling down beside his bunk. I don't know, he said, his voice small and frightened. I can't remember anything else until just now when I woke up here. A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Mike, seeing my own fear and confusion mirrored in his eyes. It's okay, Tommy, I said, trying to keep my voice soothing, despite the turmoil in my mind. You're safe now. That's what matters. As we left the cabin, leaving Tommy in the care of his bunkmates, Mike grabbed my arm. Lisa, what the hell is going on here? He hissed. People don't just disappear and reappear like that. And how could he not remember an entire day? I shook my head, at a loss for words. I don't know, Mike. But I think we can't ignore this anymore. Something is happening at Camp Nighthawk. Something we can't explain. As if in response to my words, a cold wind whipped through the camp, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter. But this wasn't the innocent laughter of a child. This was something older, something sinister. I looked out into the darkness of the surrounding forest, a sense of foreboding settling over me. Whatever force was at work here, whatever had taken Tommy and returned him with no memory of the day's events, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. As I turned to head back to my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all pawns in some larger, darker game. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of Camp Nighthawk, the faceless man was watching, waiting for his next move. The night was unusually still. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting. Just an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, sleep eluding me as it had for the past few nights. The events of the past week, Tommy's disappearance and inexplicable return, the sightings of the faceless man, swirled in my mind, refusing to let me rest. A soft creaking sound broke the silence. I turned my head to see my bunkmate Jess standing by the window. The pale moonlight cast strange shadows across her face. "Jess?" I whispered, sitting up. "Everything okay?" No response. She just stood there motionless, staring out into the darkness. I swung my legs over the side of the bunk, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Jess?" I tried again, louder this time. "What's wrong?" Slowly, so slowly it seemed almost unnatural, Jess turned to face me. My breath caught in my throat. Where her features should have been, her bright green eyes, her freckled nose, her always smiling mouth, there was nothing. Just a smooth, blank expanse of skin. I scrambled backwards, a scream building in my throat. Jess?" As suddenly as it had appeared, the blank face was gone. Jess blinked at me, her familiar features back in place, confusion evident in her eyes. "Alex, what's going on? Why are you looking at me like that?" I couldn't find my voice. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Alex?" Jess asked again, taking a step towards me. "You're scaring me. What's wrong?" I swallowed hard, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I thought I saw... Never mind. Bad dream, I guess. Sorry I woke you." Jess frowned, clearly not buying it, but she nodded and climbed back into her bunk. "Try to get some sleep, Alex. We've got a big day tomorrow." But sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. I lay there, rigid with fear, until the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. At breakfast, I couldn't stop glancing at Jess. She seemed normal now, laughing with the other counselors, spilling milk on her t-shirt like she always did. Had I imagined the whole thing? Mike, the head counselor, plopped down beside me, his plate piled high with scrambled eggs. "You look like hell, Alex," he said, around a mouthful of food. "Rough night?" I nodded, pushing my untouched oatmeal around my bowl. "Mike," I said, keeping my voice low, "something happened last night with Jess." Mike's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean, happened?" I glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. I woke up and saw her standing by the window. When she turned around, her face, it was blank, like the faceless man the kids have been seeing. Mike set down his fork, his jovial expression replaced by one of concern. "Alex, are you sure you weren't dreaming? Maybe all this ghost story stuff is getting to you." "I know what I saw," I insisted, a hint of desperation creeping into my voice. "And it's not just Jess. Look around. Something's off with some of the other kids, too." Mike followed my gaze. Now that I pointed it out, he seemed to notice it too. Several of the campers were sitting unnaturally still, their movements jerky when they did move, as if they were puppets on strings. "Jesus," Mike muttered. "What the hell is going on here?" Before I could respond, a scream pierced the air. We both jumped to our feet, racing towards the sound. We found Emily, one of the younger campers, backing away from her friend Sarah, terror etched on her face. "Emily, what's wrong?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. "Sarah," Emily stuttered, pointing a trembling finger at her friend. Her face." I looked up at Sarah. She seemed normal, if a bit confused by Emily's reaction. But there was something off about her eyes. They seemed empty, lifeless. "Sarah," Mike said gently, "how are you feeling?" Sarah's head snapped towards Mike, the movement too quick, too sharp to be natural. When she spoke, her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. "I am fine. Why wouldn't I be fine?" A chill ran down my spine. I exchanged a look with Mike, seeing my own fear reflected in his eyes. "Okay, everyone," Mike announced, his voice steady despite the situation. "I think we all need a bit of fresh air. Let's head outside for some games." As the campers filed out, Mike pulled me aside. "We need to talk to the other counselors. Something is very wrong here." An hour later, we had gathered all the counselors in the mess hall. The campers were outside under the watchful eye of the junior counselors, engaged in a massive game of capture the flag. "All right," Mike began, his voice grave. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but we think something is trying to possess the campers." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the group. Jess spoke up, her voice skeptical. "Possess? Come on, Mike, this isn't some horror movie." "I know how it sounds," I interjected. "But think about it. The strange behavior, the blank faces, the way some of them move. It's like something else is controlling them." "But what?" asked Dave, another counselor. "What could be doing this?" I took a deep breath, knowing how insane I was about to sound. The faceless man, the ghost or whatever it is that's been haunting the camp, I think it's trying to take over. Silence fell over the group. I could see the doubt on their faces, the desire to dismiss this as nonsense. But I could also see the fear, the recognition that something wasn't right. "So what do we do?" Jess finally asked, her skepticism giving way to concern. Mike ran a hand through his hair, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. "For now, we watch. We keep the kids close, don't let anyone wander off alone. And we look for any signs of possession, I guess." "And if we find any?" Dave asked. Mike and I exchanged a look. Neither of us had an answer for that. As we left the mess hall, the sound of children's laughter drifted in from outside. But now, that once cheerful sound seemed sinister, threatening. How many of those laughing children were still themselves, and how many were now vessels for something far darker? I looked out at the forest surrounding the camp, its shadows seeming to stretch and reach towards us. Somewhere out there, the faceless man was watching, waiting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of our nightmare. As the day wore on, more and more campers began to show signs of the strange behavior. By nightfall, nearly half the camp seemed to be affected. Those of us still ourselves, huddled in the mess hall, fear and exhaustion etched on our faces. "We need to do something," I said, breaking the tense silence. "We can't just sit here and wait for that thing to take us all." Mike nodded, his face grim. "You're right. But what? How do you fight something you can't even see? As if in answer to his question, a cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the lights and plunging us into darkness. And in that darkness, I swear I heard a voice. Not quite human, not quite anything I could identify. Whisper. You can't fight what you don't understand. And you don't understand anything yet. The nightmare at Camp Nighthawk was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The old leather-bound book felt heavy in my hands, its pages yellowed with age and smelling of musty secrets. I'd found it buried in a dusty corner of the camp's archives, hidden behind decades of financial records and camper registrations. The title, embossed in faded gold lettering, read, Arcane Protections and Banishments. Are you sure about this, Sarah? Mike asked, his voice tight with worry. We're camp counselors, not whatever this is. I looked up from the book, meeting his anxious gaze. The mess hall, our makeshift command center, was quiet, save for the occasional whimper from the handful of campers we'd managed to keep safe. Outside, the possessed children and counselors roamed the grounds, their movements jerky and unnatural. What choice do we have? I replied, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. We can't leave. We can't call for help. And that thing out there is picking us off one by one. If this book has even a chance of stopping it, we have to try. Jess, one of the few counselors still herself, peered over my shoulder at the ancient text. But a ritual? Come on, Sarah. This is crazy talk. I sighed, understanding their skepticism. It did sound crazy. But after everything we'd seen, was it really so far-fetched? Look, I said, pointing to a passage in the book. It talks about a ritual to banish malevolent spirits. It requires a full moon, which we have tonight, and it has to be performed at the site where the spirit is strongest, the old ranger station, Mike muttered, realization dawning on his face. Where John Hawkins died in the fire. I nodded. Exactly. We perform this ritual there, and maybe, just maybe, we can end this nightmare. There was a moment of heavy silence as the weight of what I was proposing sank in. Then, to my surprise, it was Dave, our resident skeptic, who spoke up. I'm in, he said, his voice firm. Crazy or not, it's better than sitting here waiting to be whatever it is that's happening to the others. One by one, the remaining counselors nodded their agreement. Even some of the older campers, those who had managed to resist the possession so far, volunteered to help. As we gathered the necessary supplies, candles, herbs, and a silver knife I'd found in the kitchen, I couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and dread. What if this didn't work? What if we were walking into a trap? The trek to the old ranger station was tense and silent. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the forest, shadows seeming to move and shift around us. More than once I could have sworn I saw a tall, faceless figure watching us from between the trees. Finally, we reached the clearing where the ranger station had once stood. All that remained now was a crumbling stone foundation, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. Okay, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's form a circle around the foundation. Remember, no matter what happens, don't break the circle. We arranged ourselves as the book instructed, candles flickering in the night breeze. I stood at the north point of the circle, the book open in my hands, and began to recite the incantation. By moonlight's glow and earth's embrace, we banish evil from this place. Spirit bound by pain and fire, release your hold, abandon your ire. As I spoke, the wind picked up, whipping around us with unnatural force. The candle flames danced wildly, casting twisted shadows across the clearing. It's working, Jess gasped, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. But then, just as hope began to rise in my chest, a bone-chilling scream erupted from the forest. It was followed by another, and another, until the air was filled with an otherworldly chorus of agony. "Don't break the circle!" I shouted over the din, my voice cracking with the effort. "Whatever happens, keep the circle intact." The screams grew louder, closer. Through the trees, I could see figures approaching. The possessed campers and counselors, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, And behind them, towering above the rest, was the faceless man himself. "Oh God," Mike whispered, his face pale in the moonlight. "Sarah, what do we do?" I gripped the book tighter, my knuckles white. "We finish the ritual. It's our only chance." Forcing my voice to remain steady, I continued the incantation. By star and stone, by leaf and tree, we set this tortured spirit free. No more to wander, no more to roam. Find your peace and journey home. The possessed figures reached the edge of our circle, their blank faces turned towards us with empty, accusing eyes. The faceless man stood behind them, an aura of malevolence radiating from his featureless visage. "Sarah," Jess whimpered, her resolve cracking. I can't do this. Don't break the circle," I pleaded, even as I felt my own courage wavering. "We're almost there." With a final surge of determination, I spoke the last lines of the ritual. "By the power of earth and sky, of spirit pure that cannot die, we break your bonds, we set you free. As we will, so mote it be." For a moment, nothing happened. The possessed figures continued to press against our circle, the faceless man looming behind them. Had it all been for nothing? Then suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the center of the old foundation. It shot upwards, piercing the night sky like a beacon. The possessed figures stumbled backwards, crying out in voices that were suddenly their own again. And the faceless man, he began to change. His form shimmered and shifted, the blankness of his face giving way to features, a strong jaw, kind eyes, and a smile that seemed both sad and relieved. "Thank you," a voice echoed in our minds. It was warm, grateful. "I can rest now." With a final pulse of light, the figure that had once been the faceless man, John Hawkins, I realized, faded away. The possessed campers and counselors collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing. We stood there in stunned silence, the enormity of what had just happened washing over us. It was Mike who finally broke the quiet. Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked around at the peaceful clearing, at the stirring forms of our friends who had been possessed. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the camp for days was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. "Yeah," I said, a smile of relief spreading across my face. "I think it is." As we began the task of helping the confused and groggy campers back to their cabins, I couldn't help but cast one last look at the old ranger station foundation. For a moment, I thought I saw a shimmer of something, the ghostly outline of a man in a ranger's uniform, smiling and giving a salute before fading away into the night. The nightmare was over. Camp Nighthawk was safe, but as we made our way back through the moonlit forest, I knew that none of us would ever forget the summer when the veil between our world and the next had thinned, and we had faced the unknown, and won. The morning after the ritual, I found myself wandering deep into the woods surrounding Camp Nighthawk. The events of the past few days had left me restless, filled with questions that still needed answers. The camp was quiet, most of the counselors and campers sleeping off the exhaustion of our ordeal. As I pushed through a dense thicket, my foot caught on something, sending me sprawling to the forest floor. Cursing under my breath, I turned to see what had tripped me. It was a root, but not just any root. It seemed to be carved with strange symbols, twisting away from me and disappearing into the underbrush. Curiosity piqued, I began to follow it. The root led me deeper into the forest, to a part I'd never seen before. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and twisted. An eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the crunch of leaves under my feet. Suddenly the forest opened up into a small clearing. At its center stood the entrance to a cave, its mouth dark and forbidding. The route I'd been following led directly inside. Well, I muttered to myself, in for a penny, in for a pound. Switching on my flashlight, I stepped into the cave. The beam illuminated rough stone walls covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen on the route. They seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly glow. As I ventured deeper, The cave opened up into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam fell upon something that made my breath catch in my throat. The walls were covered in intricate paintings and carvings, depicting scenes that seemed both ancient and impossibly futuristic. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "A place of great power," a voice answered, making me jump and whirl around. There, standing at the entrance to the chamber, was an old man I'd never seen before. He wore clothes that looked like they belonged to another century, and his eyes held a wisdom that seemed ageless. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart racing. "How did you get here?" The old man smiled, the expression crinkling his weathered face. "I've always been here, Sarah, watching, waiting. My name is Ezekiel, and I am the keeper of this place." I stared at him, confusion and disbelief warring within me. "Keeper? What do you mean? What is this place?" Ezekiel moved further into the chamber, his fingers trailing over the symbols on the wall. "This, my dear, is a nexus point, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. It's why John Hawkins' spirit was able to linger here for so long, and why the entity you faced was drawn to this place." My mind reeled with this information. But the ritual we performed, did it really banish the spirit? The old man's expression turned grave. "You banished a spirit, yes, but I'm afraid you've only scratched the surface of what truly dwells here." He gestured to a section of the wall, where the carvings depicted a swirling vortex with dark, shadowy figures emerging from it. "What you faced was merely a scout, a harbinger of something far more ancient and terrible." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you saying? That there's something worse out there?" Ezekiel nodded solemnly. "I'm afraid so. The entity you encountered was drawn here by the residual energy of John Hawkins' tragedy. But now that it's gone, the seal that has kept the true darkness at bay for centuries is weakening." I sank to the ground, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "This can't be happening. We thought it was over." The old man knelt beside me, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry, child. I truly am. But you've been chosen for this task, whether you want it or not." "Chosen?" I repeated, looking up at him. "What do you mean?" Ezekiel stood, moving to a far corner of the chamber. There, half hidden in shadow, was an old wooden desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "This belonged to John Hawkins," he said, handing it to me. "He discovered the truth about this place, about what lies beyond the veil. He tried to contain it, to protect the innocent lives at the camp. But in the end, it cost him everything." With trembling hands, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with frantically scribbled notes, diagrams of strange symbols, and accounts of terrifying encounters with beings from beyond our world. As I read, Ezekiel continued to speak. "John was a good man, but he was in over his head. He performed a ritual to seal the darkness away, but it was incomplete. His death left the seal weakened, allowing smaller entities like the one you faced to slip through." I looked up from the journal, my mind spinning with this new information. "So what do we do now? How do we stop this darkness from breaking through completely?" Ezekiel's expression was grim. "The ritual must be completed, but it will require great sacrifice and even greater courage. Are you prepared for that, Sarah?" Before I could answer, a voice called out from the cave entrance. "Sarah, are you in here?" It was Mike. I turned to Ezekiel, but the old man had vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. All that remained was John Hawkins' journal in my hands. Mike appeared in the chamber entrance, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you. What is this place?" I stood up, brushing the dirt from my jeans. "Mike, you're not going to believe what I've just learned." As we made our way back to the camp, I filled Mike in on everything Ezekiel had told me. To his credit, after everything we'd been through, he didn't dismiss my story outright. "So let me get this straight," he said as we emerged from the forest. "There's an ancient evil trying to break into our world, and we're the only ones who can stop it?" I nodded, clutching the journal to my chest. I know it sounds crazy, but after what we've seen, can we really take the chance of ignoring this? Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his stress. No, I suppose we can't. But Sarah, this is big. Way bigger than anything we're equipped to handle. Maybe we should call in some experts or the authorities or, I don't know, ghost hunters or something. I shook my head. We can't risk bringing more people into this, Mike. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. We need to study this journal, learn everything we can about what John Hawkins discovered. As we approached the main camp area, we could see the other counselors gathered on the mess hall porch. They looked up as we approached, their faces a mix of relief and curiosity. "Where have you two been?" Jess called out. "And what's that you're carrying, Sarah?" I exchanged a look with Mike. How much should we tell them? How much could they handle after everything we'd been through? "Everyone," I said, taking a deep breath. "We need to talk. What happened here at Camp Nighthawk? It's not over. In fact, I'm afraid it's only just beginning." As I stood there, preparing to reveal the truth about the cave, the journal, and the darkness that threatened to engulf us all, I couldn't help but feel a mix of terror and exhilaration. We were standing on the precipice of something monumental, something that could change the world as we knew it. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. Life at Camp Nighthawk would never be the same again. The mess hall was eerily quiet as I finished explaining what I'd discovered in the cave. The faces of my fellow counselors and the older campers who'd been involved in the ritual were a mixture of disbelief, fear, and resignation. Mike stood up, his chair scraping loudly in the silence. "Okay, let's think this through. We've got an ancient evil trying to break into our world, a mysterious old man who may or may not be real, and a journal from a dead ranger. What exactly are we supposed to do with all this?" I clutched John Hawkins' journal tighter, its worn leather comforting under my fingers. "We need to evacuate the camp," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get everyone to safety before we figure out our next move." Jess, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a grim determination, nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. We can't risk the kids' safety while we deal with whatever this is." Dave, always the pragmatist, spoke up. "And how exactly do we explain this to the parents?" "Sorry, we're closing the camp early because of an impending supernatural apocalypse." Before I could respond, a low rumble of thunder shook the building. We all turned to look out the windows. The sky, which had been clear blue just moments ago, was now roiling with dark, ominous clouds. "I don't think we'll need to explain much," I said, a chill running down my spine. "Look." As we watched, the storm gathered with unnatural speed. Lightning forked across the sky, followed by deafening cracks of thunder. The wind picked up, howling around the buildings and whipping tree branches into a frenzy. "Holy shit," Mike breathed. "It's starting, isn't it?" I nodded grimly. "We need to move, now." The next hour was a blur of activity. We split into teams, racing to wake the younger campers and gather essential supplies. The storm raged outside, the wind so strong it felt like it might tear the cabins from their foundations. I found myself in cabin 3, helping a group of terrified 10-year-olds pack their bags. "Miss Sarah," a small voice piped up. It was Emily, the girl who'd first seen the faceless man. "Is it the ghost again? Is he mad at us?" I knelt down, looking into her wide, frightened eyes. "No, sweetie, this isn't the ghost, but I promise we're going to keep you safe. We just need to leave for a little while, okay?" Emily nodded bravely, clutching her stuffed bear to her chest. As I helped her zip up her backpack, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the cabin, making the whole structure creak ominously. "All right, kids," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let's head to the mess hall. Stay together and watch your step." We made our way across the camp, the wind threatening to knock us off our feet with every step. The sky was almost black now, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the chaos around us. As we approached the mess hall, I saw Mike running towards us, his face pale with worry. "Sarah," he shouted over the wind. "We've got a problem. The road's blocked." My heart sank. "What do you mean, blocked?" Mike gestured frantically towards the camp entrance. "Trees, dozens of them, all fallen across the road. There's no way we're getting the buses through." I looked around at the frightened faces of the campers, then back at Mike. "Okay, new plan. Everyone into the mess hall, now." As we herded the kids inside, I pulled Mike and Jess aside. "We need to find another way out. Is the old fire road still passable?" Jess shook her head. "It's overgrown. No way we could get vehicles through there." "What about calling for help?" Mike suggested. "Surely someone could come with chainsaws, clear the road?" I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd find. No signal, of course. Inside the mess hall, chaos reigned. Kids were crying, counselors were shouting instructions, and the constant rumble of thunder added to the cacophony. I climbed onto a table, whistling sharply to get everyone's attention. "Listen up," I shouted. "I know you're scared. We all are. But we need to stay calm and work together." As I spoke, outlining our situation and the need to stay put until we could find a way out, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At the edges of the room, a strange mist was starting to seep in under the doors and through cracks in the windows. "Mike," I hissed, gesturing towards the encroaching fog. "Look." His eyes widened in recognition. It was the same otherworldly mist we'd seen during our encounter with the faceless man. "Oh God," he muttered. "It's here." As if in response to his words, the mist began to coalesce, forming into shadowy humanoid shapes. The temperature in the room plummeted, our breath visible in sudden puffs of vapor. Screams erupted as the campers noticed the ghostly figures. I jumped down from the table, my mind racing. "Everyone to the center of the room," I shouted. "Form a circle, counselors on the outside." As we huddled together, the shadowy entities pressed closer. Their features were indistinct, but I could feel the malevolence radiating from them. "What do we do?" Jess whispered, her voice shaking. "We can't fight them." I clutched John Hawkins' journal, frantically flipping through the pages. There had to be something, some clue about how to repel these things. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "The symbols, Sarah. Use the symbols." I whirled around, searching for the source. There, at the edge of the room, stood Ezekiel, the old man from the cave. No one else seemed to notice him. "What symbols?" I called back, ignoring the confused looks from the others. Ezekiel pointed to the journal. "The protection runes. Draw them quickly." With shaking hands, I opened the journal to a page I'd noticed earlier, covered in intricate designs. "We need chalk or markers," I shouted. "Anything we can draw with." As counselors scrambled to find writing implements, I began sketching the runes on the floor around our huddled group. The shadowy figures hissed and recoiled as each symbol was completed. "Keep going," Ezekiel urged. "You must complete the circle." I worked feverishly, my hand cramping as I drew rune after rune. The other counselors caught on, copying the symbols from the journal to create a protective barrier around us. As the last rune was drawn, a pulse of energy seemed to emanate from the circle. The shadowy entities shrieked, a sound that set my teeth on edge, before dissipating into wisps of mist. The storm outside quieted, the unnatural darkness receding. We stood in stunned silence for a moment, hardly daring to believe it was over. Is it gone?" Emily asked, her small voice breaking the silence. I looked to where Ezekiel had been standing, but the old man had vanished once again. "For now," I said, not sure if I was reassuring the girl or myself. "For now, we're safe." As the adrenaline of the moment faded, I became acutely aware of the task that lay ahead. We were still trapped, the road still blocked. And while we'd repelled this attack, I knew in my gut that it was only the beginning. "All right, everyone," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. We need to regroup and figure out our next move. This isn't over yet. As I looked around at the tired, scared faces of the campers and my fellow counselors, I felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Our fight to save Camp Nighthawk, and perhaps the world, was far from over. The journal in my hand seemed to pulse with hidden knowledge, and I knew that within its pages lay the key to understanding the darkness that threatened us. As thunder rumbled in the distance, a reminder that our respite might be temporary, I steeled myself for the challenges ahead. Our summer adventure had turned into something far more dangerous and important than any of us could have imagined. And somehow, I had become the reluctant leader in a battle against forces I barely understood. As I clutched the journal tighter, I silently vowed to see this through, no matter the cost. The storm may have passed for now, but I could feel it in my bones. The real tempest was yet to come. The aftermath of the shadowy attack left Camp Nighthawk in a state of uneasy calm. The protective runes we'd hastily drawn on the mess hall floor still glowed faintly, a constant reminder of the supernatural danger we'd narrowly escaped. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the campground, I gathered the counselors for an emergency meeting. "We need to face facts," I began, my voice low to avoid alarming the campers huddled in small groups around the room. "We're trapped here, and whatever's out there isn't going to stop coming for us." Mike ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "So what's the plan, Sarah? We can't keep fighting off shadow monsters forever." I placed John Hawkins' journal on the table between us. "The answer has to be in here." Hawkins knew about the nexus point, about the darkness trying to break through. He must have had a plan to stop it permanently. Jess leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "But you said the ritual he performed was incomplete. That's why all this is happening now, right?" I nodded grimly. "Exactly. Which means we need to finish what Hawkins started." Dave, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "And how exactly do we do that? We're not exactly expert occultists here." Before I could respond, a quiet voice spoke up from behind us. "I might be able to help with that." We all turned to see Emily, the young camper who'd first encountered the faceless man, standing nervously at the edge of our group. In her hands, she clutched a worn, leather-bound book that looked unnervingly similar to Hawkins's journal. "Emily?" I asked, surprised. "Where did you get that?" The girl shuffled her feet, looking down. I found it in the old ranger station before all this started. I thought it was just an old storybook, but after everything that's happened..." I gently took the book from her, my heart racing as I opened it. The pages were filled with intricate diagrams, arcane symbols, and dense text written in a flowing script. "This is it," I breathed. "This is the other half of Hawkins's research. Emily, you might have just saved us all." As I began to pore over the newly discovered tome, a low rumble of thunder in the distance reminded us that our time was limited. The other counselors set about organizing the campers, distributing food, and setting up makeshift sleeping areas in the mess hall. Hours passed as I cross-referenced the two journals, piecing together the fragments of Hawkins' plan. The sun had long since set when I finally looked up, my eyes burning from strain. "I think I've got it," I announced to the small group of counselors who'd stayed awake with me. Hawkins discovered that the nexus point isn't just a weakness in the veil between worlds. It's a fulcrum, a place of power that can be used to either open the way for darkness or seal it off completely. Mike leaned in, his face etched with concern. "So how do we seal it?" I spread out a crude map I'd drawn based on the journal's descriptions. "We need to perform a ritual at 5 specific points around the camp, culminating at the cave where I met Ezekiel. Each point corresponds to an elemental force: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit." Jess frowned. "That sounds complicated and dangerous." "It is," I admitted. "The ritual requires 5 people, 1 at each point. And once we start, we can't stop until it's finished, no matter what happens." A heavy silence fell over the group as the magnitude of what I was proposing sank in. Dave was the first to speak. "I'm in. Whatever it takes to end this and get these kids home safe." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. As we began to plan the details of the ritual, a soft voice interrupted us. "I want to help too." It was Emily again, her young face set with determination. I knelt down to her level. "Emily, honey, it's too dangerous. We need you to stay here and help keep the other campers safe." She shook her head stubbornly. "But I found the book, and I've seen things in my dreams. I think I'm supposed to be part of this." I exchanged a look with the other counselors. Could it be possible that this young girl had some kind of connection to the forces we were dealing with? After a moment of internal debate, I nodded. "All right, Emily. You'll be our anchor here in the mess hall. Can you do that? Stay here and focus on keeping everyone safe while we're out there." Emily's face lit up with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "I can do it. I promise." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we made our final preparations. Each of us was armed with a copy of the protective runes, a small bag of salt, and a burning smudge stick of sage, meager protections against the forces we were about to face. I addressed the remaining counselors and older campers, my voice tight with the weight of responsibility. "No matter what happens out there, no matter what you hear or see, do not leave this building. The runes will protect you as long as you stay inside. Emily is in charge until we return." With a final look at the frightened but determined faces around me, I turned to my 4 companions. "Ready?" They nodded, their expressions a mix of fear and resolve. As we stepped out into the misty morning air, the atmosphere around Camp Nighthawk seemed to thicken, as if the very fabric of reality was straining against what we were about to attempt. We split up, each heading to our designated ritual points. I made my way towards the cave, the culmination of our pentagram of power. The forest seemed alive around me, shadows moving in ways that defied natural law. As I reached the cave entrance, a familiar voice called out, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." Ezekiel stepped out from behind a tree, his ageless eyes twinkling with a mixture of pride and sadness. "You knew," I said, realization dawning. "You knew all along what we'd have to do." He nodded solemnly. "It had to be your choice, Sarah. Your commitment. The ritual won't work otherwise." Before I could respond, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest. The air grew cold, and a thick, oily mist began to seep from the cave entrance. "It's starting," Ezekiel warned. "Whatever happens, you must complete the ritual. The fate of more than just this camp hangs in the balance." I squared my shoulders, facing the encroaching darkness. "I'm ready." As I began to chant the words I'd memorized from the journals, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. In my mind's eye, I could see the other counselors at their positions, each surrounded by their own supernatural challenges. The mist coalesced into nightmarish shapes, twisted reflections of our deepest fears. I saw the faceless man, more terrible than ever, looming at the edge of my ritual space. But behind him, barely visible, I caught glimpses of something even worse. A vast, incomprehensible entity that seemed to exist between the very atoms of our world. My voice grew hoarse as I continued the incantation, my hands tracing complex patterns in the air. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and I could hear the tortured screams of spirits being forcibly banished. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, that the strain would tear me apart, I felt a warm presence at my side. Emily's voice, clear and strong, joined mine in the chant. Though I knew she was still in the mess hall, her spirit was with me, lending me strength. With a final, thunderous word, I completed the ritual. A shockwave of pure energy exploded outward from the cave, racing across the camp to connect with the other ritual sites. The faceless man and his minions were thrown back, their forms disintegrating in the face of the cleansing power. As suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the forest fell silent save for the normal sounds of birds and wind in the trees. Exhausted, I slumped to the ground. Ezekiel knelt beside me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. "It's done," he said softly. "You've sealed the Nexus. The darkness can't break through here again." I looked up at him, 1,000 questions on my lips, but he was already fading away, his form becoming transparent. "Your journey isn't over, Sarah," his voice echoed as he disappeared. "It's only just beginning. There are other Nexus points, other battles to be fought. But for now, rest. You've earned it." As I made my way back to the mess hall on shaky legs, I saw my fellow counselors emerging from the forest, each looking as drained as I felt. But there was also a sense of triumph, of having faced the impossible and come out the other side. The campers cheered as we entered, Emily running to hug me tightly. "You did it," she exclaimed. "I knew you could." Looking around at the relieved faces, I allowed myself a small smile. We had done it. We'd saved Camp Nighthawk and perhaps much more. But as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what we'd experienced began to sink in, I knew that our lives would never be the same. We had glimpsed a world beyond our own, faced terrors that defied explanation, and somewhere out there, other Nexus points waited, other gateways that might open to unleash unimaginable horrors upon our world. As I clutched the 2 journals that had guided us through this ordeal, I made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever battles lay ahead, I would be ready. The summer camp counselor was gone, replaced by something new, a guardian against the darkness, a protector of the veil between worlds. The adventure that had begun with a simple ghost story around a campfire had transformed into something far greater. And as I looked at my fellow counselors, I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. The sun rose higher, bathing Camp Nighthawk in warm, normal light. But now we knew. The night is dark and full of terrors, and we would be there to face them, whatever the cost.